మేడం పబ్లిక్ చేశాను చూడండి.
షేర్ చేస్తాను ఇప్పుడే.
లేదు.
స్టార్ట్ చేస్తాను నేను. లైవ్ పెట్టేశాను సంపత్.
ఓకే ఓకే మేడం. స్టార్ట్ చేద్దామా? 11:08 అవుతుంది.
స్టార్ట్. రెడీ అయినా శ్రీలక్ష్మి గారు?
మాన్సా మేడం ఒకసారి ఉమా చక్రవర్తి
ఉమా చక్రవర్తి మేడం
ఉన్నారా? అందరూ వచ్చేసినట్టేగా? డిస్కో సెంటర్ వేణు ఉన్నారు. శ్రీలక్ష్మి గారు స్టార్ట్ చేసేయండి.
సరే. అందరికీ నమస్కారం. ప్రజాస్వామిక రచయిత్రుల వేదిక, జిజ్ఞాస వేదిక సంయుక్తంగా నిర్వహిస్తున్న స్త్రీవాద సిద్ధాంతం సాహిత్య విమర్శ అంతర్జాల ప్రసంగ పరంపరలో భాగంగా 8వ సమావేశంకు ఆహ్వానం. నేటి అంశం రమాబాయి సరస్వతి. నేటి సమావేశానికి అధ్యక్షత వహిస్తున్న వారు మానస ఎండ్లూరి. వీరు వర్ధమాన తెలుగు రచయిత్రి, ప్రజాస్వామిక రచయిత్రుల వేదిక ఆంధ్రప్రదేశ్ శాఖ కార్యదర్శి. వీరి తల్లిదండ్రులు తెలుగు రచయితలైన ఎండ్లూరి సుధాకర్, పుట్ల హేమలత గారులు. ఆమె తల్లిదండ్రుల నుండి పొందిన స్ఫూర్తి ఆమె సృజన రచనకు ప్రేరణ. చిన్నతనం నుండి ఆమెకు రచనలు చదవడం అబ్బింది. చిన్నతనంలోనే హైకూలు, కవితలు రాసేది. ఆమె తొలి కథ గౌతమి 2014లో విహంగ వెబ్ పత్రికలో ప్రచురితమైంది. ఆమె అనేక కథలను రాసింది. తన రచనల్లో వివిధ సామాజిక అంశాలను స్పృశించడం ఈ యువ రచయిత్రి ప్రత్యేకత. ముఖ్యంగా స్త్రీ పురుష సంబంధాలు, స్వలింగ ప్రేమలు, సమస్యలు, దళిత క్రైస్తవ జీవన నేపథ్యంలో రాస్తుంది. ప్రస్తుతం ఒక బ్లాగ్ కూడా నడుపుతున్న ఈమె పలు పత్రికలకు కథలు రాస్తుంది. మిలింద కథల పుస్తకానికి కేంద్ర సాహిత్య అకాడమీ అవార్డు లభించింది. నేటి సమావేశానికి ప్రధాన వక్త ప్రొఫెసర్ ఉమా చక్రవర్తి. వీరు ప్రొఫెసర్ గా మిరాండా హౌస్ యూనివర్సిటీ ఆఫ్ ఢిల్లీలో విధులు నిర్వహించారు. 1980 నుండి భారతీయ చరిత్రపై, లింగం, కులం, మధ్యతరగతికి సంబంధించిన సమస్యలను ఎత్తి చూపి తన కెరీర్ లో 7 పుస్తకాలను ప్రచురించారు. ఆమె ఎక్కువగా బౌద్ధమత చరిత్ర, ప్రాచీన 19వ శతాబ్దపు భారతదేశ చరిత్రపై దృష్టి సారించింది. ఆమె తన డాక్టరేట్ అధ్యయనంలో భాగంగా తన మొదటి పుస్తకాన్ని ప్రచురించింది, సోషల్ డైమెన్షన్స్ ఆఫ్ ఎర్లీ బౌద్ధ మతం. ఆమె తదుపరి రచనల్లో అత్యంత విజయవంతమైన పుస్తకం ది లైఫ్ అండ్ టైమ్స్ ఆఫ్ పండిత రమాబాయి. స్త్రీవాద లెన్స్ ద్వారా కులాన్ని గుర్తించడం విద్యావేత్తల నుండి కూడా మంచి ఆదరణ పొందింది. ఉపఖండంలో మహిళా స్త్రీవాద చరిత్ర రచనలో ప్రముఖ పండితురాలు. ఆమె భారతదేశంలో మహిళా ఉద్యమ స్థాపక తల్లిగా పిలువబడుతుంది. స్త్రీవాద సమస్యలతో నిమగ్నం అవ్వడమే కాకుండా ఆమె ప్రజాస్వామ్య హక్కుల కార్యకర్తగా పనిచేశారు. గుజరాత్ కు న్యాయంపై అంతర్జాతీయ ట్రిబ్యునల్ తో సహా అనేక నిజ నిర్ధారణ కమిటీలలో పాల్గొంది. ఆమె మహిళలు మరియు మానవ హక్కులకు సంబంధించిన సమకాలీన సమస్యలపై వార్తాపత్రికలలో కాలంలను రాస్తున్నారు. ఆమె 4 డాక్యుమెంటరీ చిత్రాలకు దర్శకత్వం వహించారు. నేటి
డిస్కనెక్ట్ అయినట్టున్నారా?
డిస్కనెక్ట్ అయింది.
సరే, నేను కంటిన్యూ చేశాను మేడం.
ఉన్నా, చూడండి మేడం. శ్రీలక్ష్మి మేడం, మీరు మ్యూట్ చేసుకోండి, అన్మ్యూట్ చేసుకోండి. శ్రీలక్ష్మి మేడం, మీరు అన్మ్యూట్ చేసుకోండి.
ఓకే సార్, మళ్ళీ మొదటి నుండి చెప్పమంటారా సార్?
లేదు లేదు, ఇప్పుడే కంటిన్యూ చేయండి, చివరిది కంటిన్యూ చేయండి.
నేటి సమావేశ చర్చా ప్రారంభకులు నెల్లుట్ల వేణుగోపాల్ గారు. వీరు తెలుగు మాసపత్రిక వీక్షణం సంపాదకులు, రచయిత. వీరి రచనలు సమాచార సామ్రాజ్యవాదం, కల్లోల కాలంలో మేధావులు, అమ్మకానికి ఆంధ్రప్రదేశ్, కథా సందర్భం, కడలి తరగ, పావురం, ప్రజల మనిషి, తెలంగాణ నుంచి తెలంగాణ దాకా 24 పుస్తకాలను వీరు వెలువరించారు. 11 పుస్తకాలను తెలుగులోకి అనువదించారు. నేటి సమావేశాన్ని ప్రారంభించవలసిందిగా అధ్యక్షులైన మానస గారికి ఆహ్వానం పలుకుతున్నాను.
అందరికీ నమస్కారం. ఈరోజు చూస్తూనే ప్రరవే జిజ్ఞాస కలిపి నిర్వహిస్తున్న స్త్రీవాద సిద్ధాంతం సాహిత్య విమర్శ అంతర్జాల సమావేశం 8వ సమావేశానికి మనం వచ్చేసాము. ఇప్పటి వరకు ఫెమినిజం బిగినింగ్ నుంచి, అంటే మొదటి నుంచి అసలు ఎట్లా పుట్టింది దగ్గర నుంచి, ప్రముఖులైన స్త్రీవాదుల దగ్గర నుంచి మనం ఈ 7 సమావేశాల్లో మనం వింటూ వచ్చాము, నేర్చుకుంటూ వచ్చాము. ముఖ్యులైన వక్తల దగ్గర నుంచి మనం ఎన్నో విషయాలు వింటూ వచ్చాము. అలాగే ఈ రోజు ప్రొఫెసర్ ఉమా చక్రవర్తి గారు మన మధ్యన ఉండడం, మనతో ఈ రోజు ఆవిడ మాట్లాడడం ఒక అనర్గళంగా ఒక 2 గంటల సేపు, అది నిజంగా మనకు ఒక అరుదైన అవకాశంగా నేను భావిస్తున్నాను. అదే విధంగా ఇదే సమావేశంలో మనందరికీ సుపరిచితులు, మనందరికీ ఇష్టమైన రచయిత ఎన్ వేణుగోపాల్ గారు కూడా ఉండడం ఈరోజు ఒక ప్రత్యేకతని ఈ సమావేశం చాటుకుందని నేను అనుకుంటున్నాను. సో ఉమా చక్రవర్తి గారు ఇంగ్లీష్ లో మనకి స్పీచ్ ఇస్తుంటారు. ఆవిడ స్పీచ్ అంతా అయిన తర్వాత నేను తెలుగులో కొన్ని ముఖ్యమైన పాయింట్స్ ని చెప్పాలనుకుంటున్నాను తెలుగు ప్రేక్షకుల కోసం, వీక్షకుల కోసం. పైగా ఈ రోజు మనం పండిత రమాబాయి సరస్వతి గారి గురించి, ఆవిడ పేరులోనే సగం వరకు అన్ని బిరుదులే ఉన్నాయి. పండిత గాని సరస్వతి గాని, వాటికి కారణాలు, ఆవిడ జీవిత విశేషాలు మనందరికీ తెలుసు. పండిత రమాబాయి అనగానే అంటే ఇమీడియట్ గా కొంచెం సోషల్ థింకర్స్ కి గుర్తొచ్చేది ఆవిడ బ్రాహ్మణికల్ పేట్రియార్కీని ఎట్లా ఎదుర్కొన్నారు, ఎట్లా ప్రశ్నించారు, అంటే ఆ టైంలో 19th సెంచరీలో ఆవిడ ఎట్లా ప్రశ్నించారన్న విషయాలు మనకు గుర్తొస్తాయి. అదే పండిత రమాబాయి పేరు మా ఇంట్లో వింటే ఇమీడియట్ గా ఆవిడ ఒక చాలా పవిత్రమైన క్రైస్తవరాలుగా ఆవిడ్ని చూడటం ఇక్కడ ఈ చర్చ్ కమ్యూనిటీస్ లో, అట్లా నాకు ఆవిడ 2 విధాలుగా రెండు ఫేజెస్ లో చాలా ముఖ్యురాలుగా నాకు కనిపిస్తూ ఉంటుంది. ముఖ్యంగా మా అమ్మమ్మ ఒక క్రైస్తవరాలిగా నాకు తన మీద ఎప్పుడూ ఒక డిసప్పాయింట్మెంట్ ఉంటది. ఈమెకి బైబిల్ లేకపోతే చర్చ్ విషయాలు తప్పితే ఇక వేరే ఏ విషయాలు తెలియవు అని నేను ఒక డిసప్పాయింట్ అవుతున్న టైంలో ఆమె ఒక రోజు నాకు పండిత రమాబాయి నాకు ఉంది తెలుసా నీకు, ఆవిడ క్రైస్తవ సమాజానికి ఎంత సేవ చేస్తుంది, అసలు నీకేం తెలుసు, కులం గురించి ఎంత పోరాటం చేస్తుంది తెలుసా నీకు, లేకపోతే విధవరాళ్ళ గురించి, వాళ్ళ హక్కుల గురించి, వాళ్ళ అందవిహీనంగా కనిపించకూడదు అన్న దాని గురించి ఆవిడ పోరాటం చేస్తుందని మా అమ్మమ్మ మాట్లాడడం నాకు చాలా ఎక్సైట్మెంట్ ఇచ్చింది ఒకనొక సందర్భంలో. సో పండిత రమాబాయి పేరు వినగా అనగానే ఈ రెండు ఫేజెస్ నాకు ఆమె దగ్గర నుంచి కనిపిస్తూ ఉంటాయి. సో అదే విధంగా ఈరోజు ఈనాటి మన వక్త ఉమా చక్రవర్తి గారు కూడా ఆవిడ మీద రాసిన ఒక ప్రసిద్ధ గ్రంథం రీరైటింగ్ హిస్టరీ ద లైఫ్ అండ్ టైమ్స్ ఆఫ్ పండిత్ రమాబాయ్. అందులో ఆ పుస్తకం నేను నెట్ లో చదివాను. మరి అది పైరేటెడో నాన్ పైరేటెడో నాకు తెలియదు, కానీ సంభవం నేను గూగుల్లో ఆ పుస్తకాన్ని సంపాదించగలిగాను PDF. ఆ పుస్తకం చూసినప్పుడు ఈమె కూడా అంటే 80లలోనే ఎంత పెద్ద విశ్లేషణాత్మకమైన రీసెర్చ్ ఆవిడ చేశారని చెప్పి నేను చాలా ఆశ్చర్యానికి గురయ్యాను. ఆవిడ అందులో అప్పటికే ఆవిడ కాస్ట్ అంటే ఇప్పుడు మనం విస్తృతంగా చర్చించుకుంటున్న కాస్ట్ అని, జెండర్ అని, లేకపోతే క్లాస్ ఫార్మేషన్ అని మనం ఏవైతే ఇప్పుడు ఈ జనరేషన్ మాట్లాడుకుంటున్నారో ఆవిడ 80ల్లోనే వాటి గురించి చాలా విస్తృతంగా మాట్లాడడం నాకు చాలా ఆశ్చర్యాన్ని కలిగించింది. సో నేను ఆన్ అండ్ ఆఫ్ ఇంగ్లీష్ అండ్ తెలుగు మాట్లాడదాం అనుకున్నాను కానీ బట్ మెజారిటీ మనం తెలుగు వాళ్ళమే ఉన్నాం కాబట్టి ఆవిడని అడ్రస్ చేసినప్పుడు మాత్రం ఐ వుడ్ వాంట్ టు స్విచ్ ఓవర్ టు ఇంగ్లీష్. సో I would welcome Professor Uma Chakravarti Garu to deliver her speech. We are so fortunate to have you here, ma'am, and we are very much eager to listen to you and talk to you and discuss many more things about Pandit Ramabai Garu and today's feminism also. Over to you.
Okay. Thank you very much, all of you. I will try and speak as simply as possible in English so that everybody can understand a little bit, and the rest you do in summary translation so that we can unfortunately I cannot speak Telugu, so otherwise I would have spoken to you in Telugu. I can speak Hindi, but I'm not sure that you would be interested in the Hindi delivery, so I will stay with English, and I'll try and...
particularly after yesterday Amit Shah's comment.
Oh yes,
we don't want to.
No, we don't want anything to do with Amit Shah, please.
No Hindi, please.
No, yeah. Which is tragic, because there were many good people, including Pandita Ramabai.
Yeah.
Even Pandita Ramabai actually said that Hindi should perhaps be used as a base language for communication.
Yeah.
Because
Rahul Sankrucha and also you.
Yeah. But what to do? All the good people also get drowned by these rascals. What to do? Okay. By chance, I settled on this, when I was asked to speak, I thought I'll speak on Pandita Ramabai. I wasn't sure at that stage why I did that, except that I feel that there is a relevance to our times, particularly because in recent days, because of the pandemic and the work and the crisis of labor, I was reminded of Pandita Ramabai myself, because she did a lot of intervention in distress times. So she's been in my mind for other reasons. But also now I discover that it is the 100th year of her death. So 1922 is when she died, and we are in 2022. So actually, it's an interesting coincidence that has happened, and I think it's important for us to recall her and her early interventions in feminism, because in a sense, recovering our own history is critical. I want to begin by saying that I went to study Maharashtra. Although I was not a scholar of Maharashtra, I had begun by writing an essay, a long essay called Whatever Happened to the Vedic Dasi, in which Pandita Ramabai appeared at the very end of the essay. And that had been written basically on 19th century reformers and their construction of the ancient past. There was a lot of material that I had used from the Bengal reformers, because they were the ones who were kind of leading the pack early on from the 1820s, 30s, 40s onwards. They are the ones who were actually promoting the reform. So in a sense, when you write the history of women and women's reforms, Bengal, you're forced to confront Bengal because that's where much of the sources are. But I also could see that the limitations of focusing on Bengal, because in Bengal, I don't know if you all know this, you should know this, including the Marxists, everybody said, there is no caste. In Bengal, there is no caste. You know, we dealt with caste. It was a refusal to acknowledge caste as a basic fault line in Indian society. And I was very convinced that if I have to study, if I have to write about gender from a perspective of our history and our texts, I would have to deal with Brahmanic Hinduism. So there's no question that I could escape from thinking about Brahmanic Hinduism. And so I decided that the one place where already a body of writing existed, which was exploring caste in very vibrant ways, was Maharashtra. So people like Gail Ombert and so on had already written about the caste 19th century and caste question in the 19th century. And I knew that if I have to look at indigenous forms of patriarchy, then I will have to confront Brahmanical Hinduism. And therefore, it seemed to me important for me to go to a place where I could see that being contested in the early part of our reformist history. And so that's the reason why I chose to move to Maharashtra, and I located myself in thinking of giving Ramabai, using Ramabai as a point of entry to explore what was happening in the 19th century in Maharashtra. In fact, an early review of my book by a well-known media person called Pam Philippos complained that why did I have Ramabai come only at the very end of the book, that there was this, she was confined to the last chapter, because I spent a lot of time trying to look at 18th century Brahmanical Hinduism, then 19th century changes, and then questions of reform and debate, education, legal changes and stuff. And then finally I came to Ramabai's own life. So in a sense, I was trying to place Ramabai and her life and her controversies in the context of a larger history. And that is what I tried to do in the book. So there's a lot of time that I have spent in examining the context for Pandita Ramabai's extraordinary life and the extraordinary controversies that she got into, because she was a very controversial figure. So that's how I went to write this book. It took me many years, I think almost 8 years of collecting material, and finally 3 years of writing, and that's how I wrote this book. And I think it's got a certain relevance both for historians as well as for literature people, especially you're all a group of literary figures, that is to understand the context of writing itself. Who writes, what do they write, when do they write, and what kind of issues do they flag? And you see that in the very powerfully in the 19th century history. So that's my reason for focusing on Pandita Ramabai, apart from the fact that this is also the death centenary year. Pandita Ramabai never got her place in history. And when we never got her place in history, she was a very controversial figure. And you'll find that the history of social reform in India has been written without reference to women and what they were saying about social reform. It's a completely male history. It begins with Raja Ram Mohan Roy. It goes on to Ishwar Chandra Vidyasagar. then it goes to the age of consent debates. It's all very Bengal centric, and it is extremely male in its focus. So we don't actually get to know of what women were thinking, what they were saying, and how they were intervening in the debates of their time. But when you go to Maharashtra, you see a different configuration. There is interesting writing that women have left behind. And that gives us a clue to the fact that there were a lot of women who were also participating in the questions of reform of Indian society. They have not been, given their due place in either the reformist history or even in the history of, let's say, the emergence of the women's question. Now, see, when we look at Pandita Ramabai, the reason for her controversy, why all women were ignored, okay? But Pandita Ramabai in particular needed to be almost taken out of history, taken out of the framework of serious thinking because of her conversion. Her conversion became a very important element, conversion to Christianity became a very important element of assessing her. And so Pandita Ramabai was actually completely excised from the reformist debates and from writing about it. And it was very interesting because in contrast, you'll find a lot of references to Annie Besant. Annie Besant is regarded as a nationalist. Annie Besant is regarded as a great intervener in Indian. Annie Besant was extremely conservative. She didn't believe in the reform of the widow's question. She actually thought that the sacrificial widow was a good thing. It upheld Hindu society's ideals and stuff like that. So it's a strange situation. And so there is a kind of mirror contrast. Here is this Indian woman who became Christian, and that is Ramabai. And in contrast, you have Annie Besant, this Irish woman, that is from Europe, white woman, who comes to India and then throws herself into the independence movement in India, and also is fairly conservative in her assessment of the need for reform of Hindu society. In fact, she thinks that Hindu society is all right. She even included, she was outrageous enough, in my opinion, to uphold the endogamous marriage system, that is marriage within the caste, as a way of genetically retaining the purity of the communities. So you can imagine how radical someone like Ramabai could be, who in some 20-30 years ago, before Annie Besant came on the scene, had married outside of the endogamous community. She actually, she was a Chitpavan Brahmin woman, but she married a Bengali from what is called the Shudra caste. She made a what would you call it? A controversial marriage to a non-Brahmin, which is quite extraordinary for her times, because it's like hardly, you know that how much violence there is around these marriages even today. So here's a woman who does that. But because she converted to Christianity, she got damned by the nationalists and nobody paid too much attention to her. I have to say that even when I began, you see, I'm that generation of feminists and people who have the luxury of being from a upper caste, educated household, who can turn around and say, I don't believe in this or that or the other. I can turn around, and my generation, some of us were doing that. But we did not, in a sense, and we always regarded ourselves as secular humanists rather than as needing religion of any kind, which made even someone like me uncomfortable with the fact that Ramabai converted, and she converted to Christianity. So you can see how the baggage of history works itself out even in other generations. So I was a little, let's say, somewhat unsympathetic to Ramabai's need to convert to Christianity. And this, to my mind, was completely wrong, because I was not sympathetically understanding Ramabai's own location in her own time in Brahmanical Hinduism, which she felt she had to break with. So it took me a lot of time. It took me a lot of time to actually go back to 19th century history in Maharashtra and to locate Ramabai as well as other women writers of her time in a context which was actually untainted by these kind of critical gaze that I was bringing to them. I want to say this because, in a sense, I shared some of them. I mean, I felt religion was irrelevant. Like a lot of people do feel that religion is irrelevant. And a lot of early feminists did think that religion is the location of so much of the patriarchal baggage. So in a sense, we were critical of religion per se. So this also made me uncomfortable with Ramabai as a person. It took me a long time to shed that and to look at Ramabai as a figure who should be assessed based on her own personal experiences and on the choices that she made in her time, which were very rational choices, in my opinion. Emotional to some extent, but they were also very rational choices. So in a sense, that's how I proceeded to engage with Pandita Ramabai. Now, let's start with what was the context for Ramabai's own social and economic and political location. That actually is, you have to go back to 18th century Maharashtrian history. In fact, the history of Pune, because this is all happening in the heart. This part of Pune, as you might know, if you're historians, or if not, you should. That Pune came. That part of Maharashtra was actually penetrated by the colonial power only as late as 1818, which is like 100 years or so before some of these people, or say 50, 60 years before some of these people were born and were living. Now, Pune, as the heartland of Brahmanical Hinduism, Maharashtrian Brahmanical Hinduism, was an extremely unique formation, because it had survived. The Peshwas, I'm not sure about how much of the history we all know, but the Peshwas had taken over power from the Marathas, and the Peshwas were Brahmins, and the Peshwas in the 18th century ensured that a very conservative form of Brahmanical Hinduism was being practiced and promoted by the Pune state, by the Peshwai. It was called the Peshwai. The Peshwai was a very Brahmin-oriented state. And we are lucky that historians have studied that state. This brilliant work of a person called Hiroshi Fukuzawa is something that people should read, because he has actually looked at the documents in the Pune archives and has been able to map an extraordinary connection between caste and gender actually in the 18th century Peshwai Brahmanical state. And among the things that he talks about is that when the Peshwas were ruling, they ensured and reintroduced a very conservative form of Brahmanical Hinduism to operate in the state. For instance, if they heard that some father or some brother had allowed the widow in his family to retain her hair and not shave it off, you imagine the nature of the state, how despotic and how pervasive it was. If this information reached the Peshwa, he would immediately send an order saying that the male members of that household should ensure that the rules of Brahmanical Hinduism were being practiced as far as the widowhood was concerned. So it is a very surveilling, very powerful state that was penetrating into the lives of people. And so gender was one thing that they were policing, but caste also they were policing. So if there were attempts at moving up or down in the caste system, that too was being policed by the Peshwai, by the Peshwai. So it's a very, it's a significant for us to understand what is the context. You have to actually tell people to mute themselves. So this kind of state it's important for us to recognize that surveillance, control, and so on were not introduced only by the British colonial state. It existed in the Peshwai, and the Brahmanical Hinduism is a form of surveillance. You must remember, I mean, the outcasting system, for instance, you excommunicate members of particular families if they don't conform. These are all practiced by Brahmanical Hinduism, and so it is a very repressive form of policing both caste and gender in the 18th century itself. Now that is the context for 19th century social reform. So when the 19th century social reform comes, or when we try and look at what the choices are for someone like Pandita Ramabai, we must remember what we are evoking. Now, I'll refer you to the fact that there is this young woman called Muktabai Salve, who was a student, a 13-year-old student in Jyotiba Phule's School for Girls. You might all know by now that one of the reformist things that happened in the 19th century is that someone like Jyotiba Phule actually set up the first school for girls. And this non-Brahmin, Mali, that is belonging to the gardener caste, sets up the school, and young women come to it. And this Dalit girl, Mang girl, she's actually a Mang, the lowest caste that you can possibly think of. She is a student in the school. And one of the short essays that she's written, one of the interesting things that the women writing in India uncovered for a English reading public, at least, was this women's writing in various languages. And one of this essay by Muktabai Salve is included in it. It's a short essay in which she describes the state of the Dalits in her time, at her time. And it's a very powerful account of the oppression of the Brahmins and the control of Brahmins over all of society. It's a very, very powerful piece of writing. And when you think that she's a 13-year-old, you also see that what Phule was trying to do as part of the 19th century reform, which hasn't been given enough attention, in my opinion, is that he's actually trying to go beyond the idea of mere education. I think education was a very important element of 19th century reform. Those of you who are from, even in Andhra, you will all know that basically all the reformers were talking about widow remarriage or reducing the oppression of widows. And the other hand, they were also talking about education, including education for women. So these are the two twin axes of social reform that across many parts of India they were promoting. But Phule alone was actually doing something much more interesting. He wrote using traditional forms, basically. So he wrote pavadas, he wrote forms of writing which were popular in his region. And among the things that he wrote is an essay called an essay or a piece of writing called Tritiya Ratna, that is the third eye, the third gem, Ratna, but the third eye. And he's talking about what education should actually mean for people. And what is it? It's meant to be the opening of the analytical eye, this third eye. See, the two eyes are the ones that we see with, but that is what is the form, the exterior. The third eye is meant to unravel the hidden agenda, or go beyond what the eyes can see to analyze what it is seeing in a proper perspective through an understand. So knowledge, real knowledge, is the third eye, not simply the learning the ABCDs or learning the Gakhaga is not the main agenda of the of education. So this kind of writing is very powerful, because Muktabai Salve is actually exhibiting this analytical eye, because she actually argues about the oppression of the Dalits under the Peshwai, and she makes a very strong critique of the Peshwai. So you can see that Maharashtra is parts of Maharashtra are in ferment. They are in a state of unsettlement, and all of these people are playing a role in creating that awareness. So there's it's a very exciting time, and if you understand what is happening, and if you try and understand what was the differences between different people in the way they promoted reform. So the Brahmin reformers, the male reformers, they were also promoting reform, but they were promoting reform in a very limited way. So if you look at the famous M.G. Ranade, the famous judge who went on to become a judge in the end, but a great reformer, his wife has left behind a memoir which is called Himself. That is, she's basically written an autobiography of herself, but it's an autobiography of the husband, and it's called Himself. And she proceeds to write her experiences of marriage and the work that she did for women's reform. What is very interesting in this piece of writing is that you see how limited the agenda is for many Brahmin many Brahmin reformers who came on the scene. They wanted instrumental education, learning. So you need to learn formally, but they're not actually interested in you using your own power of analysis, your own understanding. And this is where the critical difference between the Phule school and the reform that happens elsewhere is concerned. For instance, Ranade's wife, she was also a Ramabai. Ramabai Ranade actually writes saying, and she goes down in history as famous for the fact that she describes her marriage to Justice Ranade. He became justice later on. He wants his wife to be a companionate wife. Now, this is the obsession of men at that time. They are a new class. They don't want the old-fashioned wives who are uneducated, who can't share with them, who can't join them in their reading and their literary pursuits and so on. It's a very interesting agenda. That is, they're complaining. Some of them are complaining and saying, we read Shakespeare, we read various people like that, but we have no one to share it with. Now, you must understand what's happening in the 19th century, that suddenly now the household is becoming the space in which a man must spend all his life. He doesn't go out very much after that. He's meant to be the companionate model of marriage is being promoted. And so there is a way in which if the men are educated and the women are not, then there is the domestic space is one which is uneven and you can't share. The idea of a companionate wife, the wife who is a companion to you, is emerging at that point of time. So it's a very interesting moment. And I'll just read to you a little passage from a man who's complaining and saying, we are frustrated. We men are frustrated because we don't have a companion of the kind that the English have. So you see, so there's this man, he's bemoaning, where is the Hinduani, wise and pure, who can quote Shakuntala and the Merchant of Venice, play the sitar or the sarangi and sing divinely? Every educated Hindu would like to have such a Kumud in his life. This Kumud is the heroine of Saraswati Chandra, the famous Gujarati novel called Saraswati Chandra. such a lovely maiden for his wife. But where are these phantoms of delight in Hindu society? They exist in the brains of those who have read Kalidas and Shakespeare, but otherwise we know them not. And so here's this man complaining, saying that I'm looking for a wife of this kind. I'm looking for a partner of this kind. So there's this obsession with teaching your wife, at least making them literate so that they can read with you. But even Justice Ranade is so controlled, and having taught his wife both Marathi and then later on introduces her to English, he controls her reading. So she describes how they read together, but they read Ramayana, they read this and that and the other. They do not read Phule, who's writing like mad at that same time. Phule is, as I just pointed out, he writes and writes and writes. He writes different forms. But that's not writing that this middle class, professional, Brahmin, emerging administrative classes is reading. They are shunning that, and the wife is certainly not allowed to read any of that. So you see that it's a very narrow, controlled agenda. It is not something that in which, even as you advocate reform, you do not unfurl the real meaning of education, which is to think for yourself and to be able to analyze and to be able to read of your own choice and make the judgments that you want to. Yeah. So this is interesting. This is an interesting limitation of the reformers. And yet there are people, and I think we should quickly go to them, apart from Muktabai Salve, Savitribai Phule herself writes, she wrote poetry, she's very much part of the reformist agenda, and she plays a lot of role in that. But there is another very powerful piece of writing, which I don't know if you people know, and which I'm not sure exists in a translation in Telugu. It's worth finding out. And this is Tarabai Shinde's polemical piece of writing called Stri Purush Tulna. She's a very angry woman, and she writes, she's a Maratha woman, she's non-Brahmin. And she is outraged at the fact that there is a debate around a Brahmin widow who is charged with killing her child, illicit within quotes, produced child. There's a huge controversy. The pages of the Marathi newspaper are filled with this condemnation for this Brahmin widow. And it's so severe and it's so outrageous that Tarabai Shinde is furious, and she writes Stri Purush Tulna, which is her polemic against men, double standards of men, because of this incident. And she turns around and she says, "Hey, you're all getting so excited about this Brahmin widow who's supposed to have committed a crime. What about the man? Where is the man in all this? There was obviously a man who was responsible for the procreation. He's left out of the debate." So she writes this very angry small book, which is called Sri Purush Tulna. And what is interesting is that the one person who defends it, everybody's furious with Tarabai Shinde, because it seems to them that she's vitriolic about the reform, the class of men as a whole. But what's interesting is that Phule defends her and defends that piece of writing. And so this is the context in which we have to place Pandita Ramabai, which is how far can you go with the reform of, reformist agenda in society. And in the end, she veers in the direction of, there is one of the things that we know from finally the limited amount of intervention that is made in women's education and so on, is that you do actually find a lot of writing by women, which emerges by the second half of last quarter of the 19th century. There's a fair amount of writing that comes out, and they're all discussing reform. they're all discussing the status of the widow in particular. Now, this is those of you who are conversant with history and sociology will know that the ban on widow remarriage was a phenomenon for basically for the Brahmins. Middle castes like the Marathas and Dalit castes did not ban the remarriage of widows. Okay, so remarriage of widows was banned for Brahmins, and it has its own, in my book on gendering caste, there is an account of the politics and the economics of the ban as it existed for different communities. But I'm not going to go into that for the moment. There will be no time. So we are faced with a situation where Ramabai, there is some voices are beginning to be critical, and it's in that context that we need to see Pandita Ramabai and her life and times. So she's born into a very her own location in Brahmanical Hinduism is very well set, in the sense that her father was a teacher who traveled around. He was something of a pilgrim. In his own way, he was a searcher of the truth and God. And he had an unconventional life because he believed that women should be educated, not barred from learning. And so he began to teach his wife, his second wife, who was much younger than him. He began to teach her, and she in turn taught Ramabai, because Ramabai was his youngest child. So she taught her daughter, Ramabai, taught her Sanskrit, because he was a scholar. He was a Sanskrit scholar. He was also Harikatha practitioner. So here's this unusual family, which is not living in a village. It is traveling. The members of this household travel from one place to another. They sing Harikatha, and they stay in a village at night, and the village feeds them, and then they move on to the next village and the next village and so on. So it's like a pilgrim existence. And that's how Ramabai grows up. She was born in 1858, just after the mutiny. And there is a marvelous photograph of the family, which I think is quite extraordinary, because it does show you the very conventional, traditional Maharashtrian family, which is not elite, and its appearance, as it were. What is significant is that the father did not marry off his daughter. He had two daughters. He married his first daughter out at the due age, the older daughter, and he tried to bring the son-in-law into the household so that this boy would also be educated. It didn't work. And the elder daughter then was quite unhappy, and she finally died. She died of and she was oppressed in her husband's household. And she died, and Ramabai says it was good that she died because she was so unhappy in that situation. Because of the bad experience of his elder daughter, Ramabai was never married. So she was not married at the age that all Brahmin young girls were married, which is to say before the age of 10, clearly that kind of thing. And she becomes unique in the way she travels from one place to another, along with her father and mother and elder brother. So they are traveling preachers, teachers, storytellers, Puranic storytellers. And in this way, she has an extraordinarily rich life, because if you travel, you are immediately extracted from that kind of narrow Brahmanical Hinduism that you would practice otherwise if you were living in a village and executing your normal social duties. So this is a very extraordinary moment in their lives. But unfortunately, as they proceed, tragedy strikes. And this is where the social reform, let's say the reformer humanitarian persona of Ramabai comes up, is that there is a terrible famine in the Telugu Andhra country, through which the family is traveling in the 1860s, and there's no food. So there's no food. The father decides to decides not to eat and die, like sannyasis sometimes do, and he goes like that. But the mother, who's much younger, and the two children, the boy and the girl, Ramabai and her brother, they are struggling for food. Ramabai's mother is unable to withstand the rigors of the starvation, and because they're also Brahmins, they can't go and work. They cannot do manual labor. This is the social rules that exist at the time, and which at that time they are following. And finally, but it's the mother is in a bad shape. So finally, Ramabai is desperate, and she goes to the village and begs for a piece of roti from. They were supposed to receive rather than go and beg, but she can't stand her mother's starvation. So she asks for this piece of bajri, and she comes back with a piece of a bajri roti, and she gives it to her mother, but the mother cannot digest it at that time because she has starved for so long. Now, I don't know if all of you know of this or have heard of this, is that you cannot actually feed starving people with normal khana. You have to actually first introduce a kind of kanji into them, because their stomachs are not used to digesting any longer. And so it takes a while for you to. So in the Bengal famine, they used to make this thin, watery starch, and that is what they fed people with to start with. And then you can give them rice or whatever it is. So the mother dies anyway, and it's a very tragic moment. So Ramabai describes how the mother dies, the father has already died, and they need 4 people to take the body to burn. This is not their village. They are traveling through some region or the other. They find, including the brother Srinivas, they find 2 others, and Ramabai is the 4th person. She's so short that she is required to be the 4th pallbearer, the person on whose head, and because she's small made, the bier rests on her head. Others lift it on their shoulder, and that is how the mother is given her funeral rites and whatever. So it's a very tragic moment. It's described with great feeling. There's also this whole sense of they are searching. They are actually searching for ultimate truth and realization, some way of surviving as well as gaining knowledge. And this process is described marvelously. Anyway, Ramabai and family then continued, Ramabai and her brother continued so she's left with father's gone, mother's gone, and only the elder brother is there, Srinivas, and they continue to travel. Now these travels are very interesting because in a sense what Ramabai becomes is a kind of ethnographer of her own time. It's like she's traveling through these places and she's collecting all this information in her head, because she's coming across different customs and so on. So many years later, and she deploys it very interestingly, because many years later, when the first census comes out, there is a description in that census of custom of the sex ratio in Rajasthan is very skewed, because there are very few girls and there are many more boys. And the reason given for this is the deaths of the child, the girl child, soon after she's born. And the reason given for the deaths of the children is that the animals have come in, hyena and so on have come and picked up the girl babies and gone. And Ramabai, who's making an assessment of the census data, so many years later, she turns around and says, this is very strange that the hyena only picks up the girl babies. It doesn't pick up the boy babies. So, she's mocking at the argument that is being presented in the to the census enumerators, as obviously it's patently false. It's like the arguments that we would make. I don't know if your generation actually had to do this, but in North India, when the women's movement first began, we had this spate of stove bursts. Supposedly, young daughters-in-law were burnt to death in a stove burst. And we had to turn around and say, how strange that the stove only bursts in the hands of the daughter-in-law. It doesn't burst in the hands of the mother-in-law. So it's a sort of as crazy as that. That is this explanation given is clearly not acceptable at all. And Ramabai has used her travel understanding to actually deploy and to argue her point of view in the pieces of writing that she does. Anyway, I'm not going to go. I don't think I have enough time to build the full story of Ramabai, but I would like to just take you to the fact that she starts off life in a very uncontroversial way. There people are delighted with her, at least in Bengal. She appears finally. She and Srinivas go to Bengal and they meet Keshav Chandra Sen. They meet a number of the reformers over there. And they're all delighted with her because she appears to them to be the manifestation of the Gargi and the Maitreyi of old times, because she's learned and she knows Sanskrit. She's learned, and so she's hailed. That's when she gets the name of Pandita Ramabai Saraswati. That's the title that she's given at that stage. And so she's lecturing and so on. And it is significant because Keshav Chandra Sen, for instance, is telling her that she should read the Vedas. She said, but can I read the Vedas? Am I allowed to read the Vedas because she's a woman? And he laughs because as a Brahmo Samaji, they have opened up Vedas, Upanishads and so on to general population's readership. So this is the context in which she meets with a very good reception. But then her brother dies. And when he too dies, then she makes this marriage to Bipin Bihari Medhavi, and he is a non-Brahmin. And she marries him, even though she has a suitor who has traveled all the way from Maharashtra to press his case, a Brahmin man. She chooses the quote-unquote the Shudra suitor because he knew the brother. And so there's a kind of trust that she has, and she marries him. Unfortunately, her life is full of misery because 2 years later, she has a little girl as a child, and the husband also dies. Now she's left all by herself. So she returns to Maharashtra, and that's when her life begins, her life as a reformer begins, and her controversies escalate. So she lands up over there. Now she's met with different types of reaction. The women, Brahmin women around her, are all furious with her because they see her as somehow upsetting the socialization that they've all been through. And so there's a very critical gaze that they charge her with, assault her with. Over a period of time, Ramabai then, decides to, she's struggling. She's struggling because she has no means of livelihood. She has no economic support mechanism. And while the reformers may have invited her there, they are not actually going to really look after her. So she begins to write. Now, this is an important thing from the point of view, you're all writers. I think she's the first known woman to write for a living. So she writes, and the first book she writes is a text, which is called Stri Dharmaniti. It's a fairly conventional text because she's talking about the need for women to be socialized in a certain way that they are actually running progressive performing progressive roles as wives and mothers. But even as she does that, so it's a manual for what women should do. But even there, she is displaying a certain amount of autonomy, because she says if the husband is being led astray, he needs to be brought back to the path and so on. So that she's actually got a reformist notion of what the intelligent woman as a wife should be performing. The book is considered to be very good, because it schools women to think and behave in a certain kind of way. And the British government actually bought up all the copies of this book and distributed them in the schools to schools, so that people would read this. So this is the first piece of writing that she does, and you see that it's not very radical. It is something that she, but even there she's showing agency, and she's not buying the rubbish of the reformer men telling us what to do. She is applying her own critical standards to what the intelligent woman should be doing and how she should be living her life. But that's something that she, with the money that she gets from there, that she is able to pay for her passage to go to England, where she hopes to be trained to be a doctor. Now, in the 19th century, a lot of the women wanted to be doctors, because that's the way you could help the condition of help women. And she goes to England. She's received by Anglican church members. She lives there, and she thinks that she's going to teach and survive there on her own. But she's disappointed to find, she meets Max Muller over there. But she's disappointed to find that she cannot join the medical course because she's hard of hearing. Now, all those years in which she's traveling from place to place, they're sleeping on the damp ground and so on. So Ramabai was hard of hearing. And she gradually, I think she lost mostly all of her hearing, but they will not take her into the course. So she's naturally disappointed and whatever it is. And it is here that she converted to Christianity, and in a sense she damned herself because she, in the eyes of the Hindu reformist male upper caste elites. Again, the only person who defends her is Phule. Phule defends her and says, what else will women do except to exit Hinduism, because Hinduism is so oppressive to women. So in a sense, the idea of conversion, of exiting a religion which you're not satisfied with, is visibly promoted, and quite as a public figure. The controversy is most sharply defined in the case of Pandita Ramabai. Anyway, now while she's there, but soon afterwards, the point is that she's an intelligent woman, and she's not only an intelligent woman, she's a woman with agency, with her own agenda. And she soon gets into a controversy with the church, the colonial church, the Anglican church, to which she has converted, because she is supposed to teach English men who are coming out to India to be trained as their officers. And the cardinal from India writes there saying she should not be allowed to do that, because she will not be accepted back by her own people if she teaches white men over there. So Ramabai is furious, and she says, do I know my people better, or does this English cardinal know my people? My mother taught me, and there was no controversy. So she's actually taking on the church and its establishment. So this is one of the things I want to point out, is that you may join a new faith. Okay, you may exit, but you don't exit patriarchy, and you can see the way in which patriarchy functions also promotes itself in other in other formations. So she gets into a controversy, and she is marvelous in the use of intelligence, argument, and ultimately, when she's faced with authority she turns around and says, I will listen to my conscience. Now, this is fantastic. At a time, she says, I don't care. I will only listen. I'll listen to my inner voice. And so my inner voice tells me something and I'll do it. So in a sense, Ramabai she may have moved from Brahmanic Hinduism to Christianity, but she's still faced with patriarchal control. And this is one of the controversies that she is strongly, faced with in her life. She also travels later on to the US, where she does public speaking. She goes to meetings and she's talking about the condition of widows because she's trying to raise money for a widow's home that she will open in India when she returns. So she goes on a speaking tour. She goes from place to place and collects a Ramabai Association, Friends of Ramabai Association. She's traveling in the US at the same time that Vivekananda is traveling after the great address that he makes to the Chicago Conference of Religions. And they get into a confrontation because she's talking about the miseries of the widows in India, and he's turning around and promoting over there in the US, saying he knows Indian society, he has traveled around, and he can say with authority that no woman, no widow in India is oppressed by anything at all. So you can see that the promotion and the lies that you tell in order to promote a point of view is something that is happening right there in the 1890s in the US. But significantly, even there, she's moving from one place to another. She goes to churches and she's sometimes speaking in the churches. And she attacks the fact that the churches do not enroll women as clergymen. So she's very consistent in her promotion of the woman and the right of women to not only be educated, but to be in every particular sphere. And she's quite marvelous because while she's there, she meets a lot of reformers. She met Harriet Tubman, the Negro reformer. And she writes letters. There are a marvelous set of letters called Letters and Correspondence of Pandita Ramabai. She's writing some of those letters she's writing to her little daughter who has been left behind in England while she's traveling and gone on this speaking tour. And she describes to this little girl, she's doing this progressive education. She describes Harriet Tubman and the condition of the slaves in America and how Harriet Tubman has helped many slaves to escape from where they are, where they're being exploited. So it's an extremely fascinating journey that she is engaged in, and she's learning continuously. And as she's traveling, she's also writing. So she writes in Marathi and she writes back articles that are published in Marathi at home. And in many of these letters, she describes travels, she describes people whom she meets and so on. So again, she's deploying writing. And then she writes this very powerful book, which is called The High Caste Hindu Woman. That's her sort of classic. It's a sort of counter to the Manu Dharma Shastra, but it is focused particularly on women. And she progressively, like Manu and the Brahmins will divide human beings' life span into 4 stages. The student, then the grahastha, then the vanaprastha, and then the sannyasi. She also uses that same model by talking about the young girl child, then the married woman, then the mother, and finally the widow. So she also, and as she proceeds, she escalates, she increases the burden of exploitation and oppression of women as they grow from childhood to motherhood, to wifehood, to motherhood, and to widowhood. So it's quite powerful. And she actually does a very interesting way in which she puts the rules for the widower as derived from Manu against the rules for widows also derived from Manu. She puts them together and you can see immediately the double standard of sexual morality, because the rules say after a man has burnt his wife of equal status, he goes home, he observes the mourning period of 13 days, and then he remarries and relights the grahastha fires, for which you need a wife. Huh? And so he remarries immediately. And while many in another place, Manu is describing the rules for the widows, what Ramabai does is to put those two texts next to each other. And you can immediately see the double standard of sexual morality. Because for the woman, it says, and then she gives up on this, and she must never raise the name of another man. I mean, like, so she does this artful juxtaposition of the rules for the man along with the rules for the woman, and she's making clear to you what it means to be a woman in India, and she's made it very clear. It's the high caste Hindu woman who's actually oppressed the way she is. So it's that piece of writing is something that she does. It sells. All of this is meant to be money that she accumulates to go back and open the home for widows in Maharashtra. Now, I don't have the time to actually go into the details of this, but when she returns, apart from getting into controversies, because she refuses to say that her children, the girls in her school, cannot convert to Christianity if they want to. She says, I'm not telling them to, but I'm not closing the doors when I read the Bible. And if they choose to become whatever they do, then that's their choice. But she gets into terrible controversy and she's shunned by the reformers. They completely throw her out over there. Tilak and so on are hysterical. So there is this conservative lobby that's against her. But Ramabai quietly does continue to do her own work. There's a lot of struggle. She does continue to do her own work. And when the next round of the famine comes, when she is running this institution, she actually travels to central India where the famine is terrible. And she brings back hundreds of children from there to her institution in Pune. The Pune municipality is outraged. The Pune Brahmins around her are outraged and say, what is this with the rubbish? All these rural types being brought in, people being brought in. And they appeal to the municipality to get rid of those children. And Ramabai just turns around and says, okay, she has a piece of land outside, some 60 kilometers away from Pune. She just shifts all of these children to and her own institution to those 60 kilometers away and starts off the Sharda Southern, what is it called? Mukti Southern. She sets up the Mukti Southern there. And she sets up, and it's a very interesting experiment because her girls are in that institution. They are trained to do everything, including weaving and gardening and farming and printing. They are taught all of these skills over there, and she runs this kind of parallel institution over there. And it is and then the relief that she does for other widows and also for women who are for men, women, basically women and children who are affected by the famine conditions. So she can never forget that her own parents died during the famine, and so she does this interventionist work, which is why I was so. And then later on, she gets into there's the plague work that happens, during which she gets into a controversy with the British government because they forcibly move people into camps, and then one of her students gets abducted from there by a warder, and so she's very furious, and she gets into a controversy with the governor of Bombay. So they have a slanging match in the newspapers and so on. So it's a big, and at that stage, then suddenly out of the blue, Mr. Tilak becomes her defender, because she takes on the colonial government, and she actually says, "Are you saying that only Orientals lie? I'm sorry, you guys also lie." And so she basically calls the governor a liar. And everybody is outraged and so on. But she is someone who's principled and takes this on. So the attempt at leading a meaningful life, helping women who are destitute and cast away, also responding to distress and so on, is what actually, I mean, in a sense, are attributes of Ramabai, which is why, as I said, I was thinking of her when the huge labor, the crisis of labor during this last pandemic hit us. And I was struck by the fact that here was a person who spoke in her own time in such powerful ways about the manner of administrative failure in her, in intervening in alleviating distress of people, food, hunger, shelter, and whatever it is. So there's this very interesting life that she does. Apart from which, as I said, she's got this massive amount of writing that she's left behind, all of which is very powerful, which fortunately now almost everything has been translated into English. And so we know a lot about Ramabai through all of this. Now, ultimately, one last thing I'd like to say before I close it. Ramabai, I don't know if you people have heard of Ramabai, but Ramabai also gets into a controversy because she's married to someone called Dadabai, and she contests. They use there's a deal that he will grow up in her house and be educated, because she is an educated young woman. He refuses to live that life, and she's the owner of property of her own, because her father left her. She belongs to one of the castes where widow remarriage was happening, and so her father had left her a piece of property. That's very, what would you call it? It's lucrative from the point of view of the boy's family, and they tried to force her to come and live there. Ramabai refuses to go. He files a suit for the restitution of conjugal rights. She goes to court, and she takes the stand that you cannot force me to go. The marriage has not been consummated. She was married before she was 11. And so she actually takes the position that it was done without my consent. So she basically denounces that marriage and refuses to move to the husband's house. She goes on later on to becoming a doctor. There's a huge controversy. There's a terrible controversy. Everybody jumps into it, and they're attacking her and saying, unlike Savitri, look at how she's behaving. Savitri nursed her sick husband. Here is this woman who refuses to move to her husband's home. All of that stuff. And Ramabai at that time writes a letter, which is, I think, I'll close on that. That's a very interesting letter. She says, she's outraged, and she says, why will the British government bother about the rights of Ramabai? It has made its deal with the men of India. So they are not going to uphold the cause of this woman who's refusing to be forced to go into her husband's home and forcibly consummate that marriage, which is something that she's denied. So in a sense, you can see what's happening in 19th century Maharashtra is actually quite extraordinary and quite unique in terms of interrogating and contesting the nature of patriarchy and its oppressions for women. This is what I think is a very powerful element of Ramabai's work. And so, in fact, the history of Maharashtra and the history of women in Maharashtra should be really studied over there. And I'll leave it at that. I'll close on that.
Ma'am, actually you can go on till 1 p.m. if you
1 p.m. is within 2 hours, my dear. What's the question and answer?
yeah, if at all, if you want to add something up,
No, if people want to ask me questions, that will give me time to bring in other aspects.
Yeah, usually every Sunday we go on till 2 o'clock. So
2 o'clock. I was told 1 o'clock. But please go ahead, ask questions, and I'll take it there.
Okay, it is better, Manasa.
Okay.
అయితే క్వశ్చన్స్ వస్తుంటే మేడం మాట.
Madam is 80 years old, you know.
Oh no, not at all.
We are much older, ma'am.
Okay, come on.
Yeah. So thank you so much, ma'am, for your edifying lecture on Ramabai. I'm still having goosebumps, to listen to you for a long time. And it's almost like, sitting in a classroom and listening to your professor. So Ramabai గారి గురించి ఇప్పటి వరకు మనం చాలా విషయాలు తెలుసుకున్నాము. ఆవిడ దాదాపుగా మనకి 19th century మరాఠీ కాలం అంతా ఎట్లా ఉంటుందన్న ఆ నేపథ్యం కూడా మనకి చెప్పారు. పేష్వాలు మరాఠీలని లొంగ తీసుకోవడం దగ్గర నుంచి ఆ నేపథ్యంలో బ్రాహ్మణీయ పురుష స్వామ్యం ఎట్లా పెంపొందింది అన్న విషయాల దగ్గర నుంచి రమాబాయి విధవరాళ్ళని ఎట్లా చైతన్యపరిచారు అన్న విషయాల దగ్గర నుంచి మనకి చాలా విషయాలు మనకి చెప్పుకుంటూ వచ్చారు. అలాగే అన్నిటికంటే నాకు మోస్ట్ ఇంట్రెస్టింగ్ గా అనిపించిన విషయం, అప్పట్లో మేల్ రిఫార్మర్స్ అంటే పురుష సంఘ సంస్కర్తలు కూడా పురుష స్వామ్యాన్ని నేరుగా ప్రశ్నించలేని విషయాల్ని రమాబాయి మళ్ళీ ప్రశ్నించాల్సిన అవసరం గాని అటువంటి ఉదంతాలు కూడా మనకి చాలా వరకు మేడం చెప్పారు, ఉమా మేడము. అలాగే విధవల పునర్వివాహాలు కూడా కేవలం బ్రాహ్మణ స్త్రీలకు మాత్రమే అంటే ఆ సౌలభ్యం అందింది తప్పితే మిగతా కులాలకి, దళితులకి, శూద్రులకి అంతగా అది ఆ పునర్వివాహం వెళ్ళలేదన్న విషయం కూడా చెప్పారు. అలాగే రమాబాయి అప్పటి బ్రాహ్మణ సంస్కృతిలో ఉన్నట్టుగా అతి చిన్న వయసులో పెళ్లి చేసుకోలేదు. ఆవిడ అప్పటికే 22వ ఏటలో ఆవిడ పెళ్లి చేసుకున్నారు. 24వ ఏటకి ఒక కూతురుతో ఉన్నప్పుడు తను విధవరాలుగా మారడం గురించి చెప్పారు. అలాగే మనుస్మృతిలో ఉన్న స్త్రీని ఎటువంటి పరిస్థితుల్లో పెట్టారన్న విషయాలు కూడా ఆవిడ చెప్పారు. ఎంత కాంట్రవర్షియల్ ఫిగర్ అన్నది కూడా మనకి అర్థమవుతూ ఉంది. అలాగే ఉమా చక్రవర్తి మేడం కూడా తను రాసిన పుస్తకంలో రీరైటింగ్ హిస్టరీ ద లైఫ్ అండ్ టైమ్స్ ఆఫ్ పండిత్ రమాబాయి అనే పుస్తకంలో తను ఒక 2 విషయాలు రమాబాయి చేసిన 2 విషయాల్ని ఆవిడ 2 లక్ష్మణ రేఖలు అన్న విషయం ఆవిడ ఉటంకించారు. అంటే అప్పటి పురుష సంఘ సంస్కర్తలు మాట్లాడలేని బ్రాహ్మణ పురుషాధిపత్యాన్ని విమర్శించలేని విషయం ఒకటి. అలాగే 19వ హిందూ సమాజం ప్రకారం రమాబాయి క్రైస్తవంలోకి రావడం అనేది ఒక దేశద్రోహంగా కూడా అంటే హిందూ సమాజం అట్లా చూసింది, దేశద్రోహంగా చూసిందన్న విషయాల్ని ఉమా చక్రవర్తి గారు దాన్ని 2 లక్ష్మణ రేఖాస్ అని చెప్పి, అంటే ఈ 2 లక్ష్మణ రేఖల్ని ఆవిడ అధిగమించింది అన్నట్టుగా చెప్పారు. సో అలాగే ఈ రోజు మన మధ్య ఇందాక చెప్పుకున్నట్టు ప్రముఖ విమర్శకులు, ఆలోచనా పరులు వేణుగోపాల్ గారు ఉన్నారు. ఐ హోప్ ఈస్ దేర్. ఉన్నారు. ఇప్పుడు రమాబాయి గారి మీద మనం చర్చ ప్రారంభించవలసిందిగా ఆయన్ని కోరుతున్నాను.
మిత్రులందరికీ నమస్కారం. ఉమా మాట్లాడిన తర్వాత నిజానికి ఇంకా ఏమన్నా వివరాలు కావాలని ప్రశ్నలు అడగడమే తప్ప చర్చ చేయడానికి ఏమీ ఉండదు. Uma, what I was saying was, when you speak, there won't be questions about more clarification, but not any debate or discussion.
Okay.
I cannot do that. Actually, Uma, I first met her in 1982 when our common friend Subbarao took me to their house. Anand and Uma were there. And since then, Uma has been a friend, and she came all the way to Hyderabad to release my book, my translation of Freddy Kosambi. And she is very well known to Telugu people actually. Her book, Gendering Caste, through a feminist lens, has come into Telugu, and it's widely read and discussed. So, Uma గారి గురించి ప్రత్యేకంగా తెలుగు పాఠకులకు పరిచయం చేయవలసిన అవసరం లేదు. స్త్రీవాద దృక్కోణంలో జెండర్ కులం అనే పుస్తకం, ఆమె రాసిన మిగిలిన 7-8 పుస్తకాలు ప్రధానంగా బౌద్ధం మీద, 19వ శతాబ్ది మీద, ఆధునిక భారత చరిత్ర మీద, అన్నిటికన్నా ముఖ్యంగా ఆమె పీపుల్స్ యూనియన్ ఫర్ డెమోక్రటిక్ రైట్స్ PUDRలో 80 నుంచి పనిచేస్తూ ఉన్నారు. ఆ PUDR కార్యక్రమాల్లో భాగంగా ఇక్కడ పౌర హక్కుల కృషిలో కూడా ఆమె భాగస్థులయ్యారు. అందువల్ల ఆమె గురించి ఉమా చక్రవర్తి ఒక రకంగా తెలుగు మనిషి కిందనే లెక్క. ఆమె ఓరల్ హిస్టరీస్ ఆఫ్ ఉమెన్ లీడర్స్ ఆర్ ఉమెన్ పార్టిసిపెంట్స్ ఆఫ్ రెవల్యూషనరీ మూవ్మెంట్స్ ఒక డాక్యుమెంటరీ చేశారు. డాక్యుమెంటరీ ప్రయత్నంలో భాగంగా ఆంధ్రప్రదేశ్కు, ఉమ్మడి ఆంధ్రప్రదేశ్కు, తెలంగాణకు చాలాసార్లు వచ్చారు. కొండపల్లి కోటేశ్వరమ్మ గారిని ఇంటర్వ్యూ చేశారు. అటువంటి చాలా మందిని, మల్లు స్వరాజ్యం గారిని ఇంటర్వ్యూ చేశారు. ఆమెకు తెలుగు సమాజానికి ఉన్న సంబంధం చాలా సన్నిహితమైంది. ఇవాళ ఆమె ఎంచుకున్న అంశం పండిత రమాబాయి. నిజానికి ఆమె 1980లోనే ఆమె పండిత రమాబాయి పుస్తకం రాశారు. పండిత రమాబాయి 1858 నుంచి 1922 వరకు మహారాష్ట్ర సమాజంలో ప్రధానంగా స్త్రీ విద్య కోసము, స్త్రీల అభివృద్ధి కోసము, సంఘ సంస్కరణ ఉద్యమం అప్పటి వరకు లేవనెత్తుతున్న అనేక అంశాలను ఇంకా ముందుకు తీసుకుపోవడం ఎట్లా అని పనిచేశారు. ఆమె మీద ఒక పరిశోధన గ్రంథమే రాసిన ఉమా చక్రవర్తి గారు ఇవాళ ఆమెను పరిచయం చేసిన, కేవలం వ్యక్తిగా పండిత రమాబాయిని పరిచయం చేయడం మాత్రమే కాదు, పండిత రమాబాయి అనే ఒక ఫెనామినన్ ఎట్లా మహారాష్ట్ర సమాజంలో ఆవిర్భవించింది, ఆ ఫెనామినన్ యొక్క ప్రధాన లక్షణాలు ఏమిటి చెప్పడానికి, ఆమె జీవిత చరిత్ర చెప్పడం కన్నా ఈ అంశాలు చెప్పడానికే ఎక్కువ సమయం తీసుకున్నారు. నేను ఆమె ఉపన్యాసం, నిజానికి చాలాసార్లు ఆమె ఉపన్యాసాలు విన్నాను. ప్రతిసారి అది సమ్మోహకమైన ఉపన్యాసం. ఇవాళ ఒక 7-8 అంశాలు ప్రధానంగా ఉన్నాయి. అవి మన మిత్రులు చర్చకు, వాటి మీద చర్చిస్తే బాగుంటుంది. మొట్టమొదటిది ఆమె ప్రారంభమే. ఇంతవరకు మనం సంఘ సంస్కరణ చరిత్ర 1820లు 30లలో బెంగాల్లో ప్రారంభమై అన్ని రాష్ట్రాల్లోకి, అన్ని బ్రిటిష్ ఇండియా ప్రాంతాలలోకి వ్యాపించిన సంఘ సంస్కరణ ఉద్యమ చరిత్ర చదివినప్పుడల్లా అది కేవలం పురుషులు నడిపిన చరిత్రగా, నిజానికి దానిలో ఉన్న విషయాలేమో స్త్రీ విద్య, వితంతు పునర్వివాహం, ప్రజాస్వామిక సంబంధాలు ఏర్పడడం, ఎక్కువగా స్త్రీలకు సంబంధించినవి. కానీ అదంతా పురుషుల చరిత్రగా ఒక రాజా రామ్మోహన్ రాయ్, ఒక కేశవ్ చంద్రసేన్, ఒక కందుకూరి వీరేశలింగం, ఎక్కడైనా తీసుకోండి అన్ని భాషల్లోనూ అది పురుష చరిత్రగా ఉండింది. ఆ పురుష చరిత్రలో నిజానికి సమాంతరంగా స్త్రీ సంఘ సంస్కరణవాదులు ఎంతో మంది ఉన్నారు. వాళ్ళ పేర్లు రాలేదు. ఎక్కడైనా వాళ్ళ పేర్లు వచ్చిన చోట కూడా పండిత రమాబాయి పేరు మరింత తగ్గిపోయింది, ఆమె క్రైస్తవంలోకి మారడం వల్ల. ఇటువంటి ఒక నేపథ్యం నుంచి నేను మామూలుగా సంఘ సంస్కరణ చరిత్ర రాస్తూ చదువుతూ ఉన్నప్పుడు ఇది ఎందుకు లేదు, బెంగాల్లో ఇది కనబడడం లేదు, మహారాష్ట్రలో ఏమన్నా ఉందా అని వెతకడానికి పోయినప్పుడు మొదట నిజానికి ఉమా చక్రవర్తి గారు ప్రారంభంలో ఈమె క్రైస్తవంలోకి మారినందువల్ల ఇది ఆమెను ఎట్లా చూడాలి సంఘ సంస్కరణ అనేది కొంచెం అనుమానాలతోనే వెళ్ళాను. కానీ అక్కడికి వెళ్ళిన తర్వాత ఆమె క్రైస్తవంలోకి మారడం అనేది మిగిలిన వాళ్ళందరూ విమర్శించినప్పటికీ జ్యోతిబా ఫూలే ఒక్కడే సమర్థించాడు. అది ఒక హేతుబద్ధ ఎంపిక అని నాకు అర్థమైంది. అది కేవలం ఏదో ఒక ఉద్వేగభరితమైన లేదా ఇవాళ చాలా చెప్తున్నట్టుగా కొన్ని ఆకర్షణలకు లోబడిన మార్పు పరివర్తన కాదు. మతాంతరీకరణ మళ్ళీ వాళ్ళ ఒక ప్రధానమైన సమస్యగా వస్తూ ఉన్నది. మతాంతరీకరణ వ్యతిరేక బిల్లును కూడా సంఘ్ పరివార్ పాలకులు తీసుకొస్తూ ఉన్నారు. అటువంటి సందర్భంలో ఇవాళ ఉమా చక్రవర్తి గారు ఒక 100 సంవత్సరాల కింద 120 సంవత్సరాల కింద ఒక పండిత రమాబాయి, సంస్కృత పండితురాలైన రమాబాయి క్రైస్తవంలోకి మారడం అనేది ఒక రేషనల్ చాయిస్, ఒక హేతుబద్ధ ఎంపిక అనే అంశం ఇవాళ చాలా బలంగా చెప్పారు. అట్లాగే రెండో విషయం ఆమె ఇవాళ బలంగా తీసుకొచ్చింది, పూనా చుట్టుపట్ల ఉన్న మహారాష్ట్ర సమాజంలో కూడా పూనా సమాజంలో ఉన్న ఒక ప్రత్యేక స్థితిలో పండిత రమాబాయి ఎట్లా వచ్చిందో అర్థం చేసుకోవాలి. ముఖ్యంగా భీమా కోరేగాం కేసు తర్వాత మనందరము పీష్వాల రాజ్యం ఎట్లా ఉండిందో మళ్ళీ తెలుసుకున్నాం. చాలా 2 ఏళ్లుగా పూనా పీష్వాల రాజ్యం గురించి, పీష్వాహి నిజానికి ఇప్పుడు సంఘ్ పరివార్ ప్రభుత్వానికి కోపం వచ్చిందే నహీ పీష్వాహి నహీ చెలేగి అనే ఒక నినాదం వచ్చినందువల్ల. ఈ నయీ పీష్వాహి గురించి మనం మాట్లాడుతున్న రోజుల్లో పురాణీ పీష్వాహి ఎలా ఉండింది, పురాణీ పీష్వాహి ఎంత, అది కులం విషయంలో ఏం చేసింది, చాలా చర్చలు జరిగి ఉన్నాయి, విషయాలు తెలిసి ఉన్నాయి. జెండర్ విషయంలో కూడా అది ఎట్లా ప్రవర్తించింది అని ఆమె ఉదాహరణలు ఇస్తూ పూనా లొకేషన్ లో ఈ పండిత రమాబాయి లాంటి సంస్కర్తలు వచ్చే అవకాశం, జ్యోతిబా ఫూలే లాంటి సంస్కర్తలు వచ్చే అవకాశం ఎట్లా ఉండింది, ఎట్లా అవసరం ఉండింది అది చెప్పడానికి కూడా ప్రయత్నం చేశారు. ఇది కూడా మన చర్చకు ఒక ప్రధాన అంశం అవుతుంది. అట్లాగే మూడో అంశం, బ్రాహ్మణ సంఘ సంస్కర్తల వాళ్ళ ఉద్దేశాలు, వాళ్ళ పనులు ఎంత గొప్పవైనప్పటికీ దానికి పరిమిత కార్యక్రమం ఉంది, లిమిటెడ్ ఎజెండా అనేది గుర్తుపెట్టుకోవాలి. ఈ లిమిటెడ్ ఎజెండాను పండిత రమాబాయి దాటారు. ఆమె ఈ పరిమిత ఎజెండాను దాటి దాన్ని విస్తృతం చేయడానికి ప్రయత్నం చేశారు. ఈ 3 ప్రధానమైన భూమికల మీద ఆధారపడి పండిత రమాబాయి జీవితం ఎట్లా గడిచింది, నిజానికి ఆమె పండిత రమాబాయి జీవితము, ఆమె రచనలు, స్త్రీ ధర్మ నీతి కానీ, లేదా హైకాస్ట్ ఉమెన్ కానీ, లేదా ఆమె తన జీవిత కథ రాసుకుంది, ఆత్మకథ రాసుకుంది, ఆత్మకథ కానీ చాలా అద్భుతమైనవి ఇంగ్లీష్లో కూడా వచ్చున్నాయి. వాటిలోని కొన్ని భాగాలను ఉమా చక్రవర్తి గారు వివరించారు. చాలా నాకు ఆసక్తికరమైన ఇవాళ అంశం, సరిగ్గా వివేకానందుడు పండిత రమాబాయి ఒకే కాలంలో, ఇవాళ వివేకానందుడు ఒక విప్లవకారుడు అని చాలా ప్రచారం చేస్తూ ఉన్నారు, చాలా మంది అనుకుంటూ ఉన్నారు, భ్రమపడుతూ ఉన్నారు. వివేకానందుడు ఏమి చెప్పాడు, పండిత రమాబాయి ఏం చెప్పింది, ఉమా చక్రవర్తి రెండింటిని కాంట్రాస్ట్ చేశారు. చాలా భావస్ఫోరకమైన, ఆలోచనాస్ఫోరకమైన ఉపన్యాసం. ఉమా చక్రవర్తి గారికి కృతజ్ఞతలు. ఈ 3-4 అంశాల మీద, లేదా ఇంకా అదనపు సమాచారం తెలుసుకోవాల్సిన వాళ్ళైనా చర్చను కొనసాగించవలసిందిగా కోరుతూ నాకు ఈ అవకాశం ఇచ్చిన ప్రజాస్వామిక రచయితల వేదికకు కృతజ్ఞతలు.
సో ఎవరికైనా ప్రశ్నలు ఉంటే అడగచ్చు.
మేడం హ్యాండ్ రైజ్ చేయమనండి.
హ్యాండ్ రైజ్ అనే చేయొచ్చు.
ఒకరు ఉన్నారు చూడండి,
విమలా కొల్లాపురం.
మేడం మాట్లాడండి. విమలా మేడం
అన్మ్యూట్ చేసుకోండి.
విమలా మేడం మీరు మాట్లాడండి, అన్మ్యూట్ చేసుకోండి.
Thank you so much, Uma garu. That's wonderful presentation, and it was wonderful. I have just one kind of interest of knowing more about the Anabesant and Ramabai. Is there any written communication between them, or did they meet, or what was that? And you explained about their
Yeah. No, I'm not sure that they met. I raised this because I was intrigued myself, I was, how is it that we have written our history in a way in which we have no place for Ramabai, but we are full of feeling for Annie Besant.
Yes.
So it is a contrast in terms of the positions that they were taking. And so I'm not sure whether they met anywhere at all. One of the people whom Ramabai did meet, and which is insignificant in my opinion, is Kamala Devi Chattopadhyay.
Okay.
So Kamala Devi Chattopadhyay, in her memoirs, she writes about, it's a very interesting account, the book which is called Inner Spaces, Outer Recesses, something like that.
Mm-hmm.
She describes meeting Ramabai, and there is that connection of them being from Konkan. Kamala Devi Chattopadhyay is very excited to discover that she has come to a hospital in their part of the region with her daughter, because Pandita Ramabai's daughter, whom she expected would grow into becoming running the institution, she died even before Ramabai died. She had a tumor, and she had gone for treatment to this place. So Kamala Devi Chattopadhyay describes the excitement of going to see Ramabai and talking to her and sharing their views on women and so on. And I'm not sure you should how much people know about Kamala Devi Chattopadhyay, but she was quite unusual because she openly broke with her husband, who was a very well-known person. He was this man called, Harendranath Chattopadhyay. She was married to Harendranath Chattopadhyay.
Yeah.
But, and for a long time, one thought that there was a mismatch between these two characters, because she was a certain kind of person and he was, it was clear that he was colorful and he had many relationships. But what really broke the thing was that there was a woman staying in their house to look after the child, and Harendranath Chattopadhyay was sleeping with her. And then she left home. So you can see what challenges women were faced with in their time in the 1930s or whatever it is. And Kamala Devi was amazing. I mean, she went on to becoming the heroine of the salt agitation. But she was quite so these two women meeting and liking and being influenced by each other is a very nice description in her book. So this much we know that she met. I don't think I have no information about the Annie Besant and Ramabai meeting. And since Ramabai was a good documenter of everything, if she had met her, she may have written this down. What is interesting is one last thing, because you raised this question. See, even as she and Ramabai Ranade, that is the wife of M.G. Ranade, Ranade broke with Pandita Ramabai after the conversion controversy. Okay, he exited from the management of the committee and all that, and left Pandita Ramabai on her own. But Ramabai Ranade and Pandita Ramabai retained a relationship with each other, despite the break that the husband had made. And even before she died, just before she died, Ramabai Ranade was still sending people young widows who had no other home, to Ramabai's institution. So there's a very interesting way in which the women bonded with each other. The men were involved with a nationalist image, but the women could see that actually what was needed was a safe home for the widows. And so till the very end, she was sending people there to Ramabai, Pandita Ramabai's institution.
Yeah. Well, because you mentioned Harendranath Chattopadhyay, who we think is a great revolutionary.
Yeah, of course we do.
And we have connections with him in Telangana. I mean, and he wrote, he wrote poems on my village even.
Yeah.
But I didn't know about Kamala Devi's Chattopadhyay's.
And we didn't know why they broke. See, that's the most interesting thing. See, you tell official history, you don't tell the other history. Harendranath Chattopadhyay met my husband as a baby. Okay. And he wrote a little poem for him also.
Okay.
My mother-in-law says that he wrote a poem. My mother-in-law belonged to Hyderabad. So, so
Yeah.
there is that connection. But this is the story of patriarchy, no?
Right. Right. And one more thing, sorry, I'm taking more time, but how about Savitri Bai? Did she commented anything? Because you mentioned about Phule.
Yeah, see, I don't know of Savitri Bai Phule commenting on Pandita Ramabai, but in a sense, I think this is also the limitation of the Pune Brahmins. She had something to do with the Pune Brahmins, and she broke with the Pune Brahmins. And so Phule publicly wrote about it. Now we don't know what Savitri Bai thought of Pandita Ramabai. I would think that she may have had some, at least they would have known of each other, because Savitri Bai Phule, you will remember, is saving the children of Brahmin widows.
Yeah.
In her institution, she made space for the children of Brahmin widows who were being cast away by their families, by the husband's families. And you know that you should all know that Savitri Bai and Jyotiba Phule adopted one of those children. So they had no children of their own. So they brought up one of these widows' children as their son. So because they were sharing a sort of reformer space, maybe they would have known each other. You know?
Yeah. Thank you so much. And we learned a lot from your book, Gendering Caste. It's a wonderful contribution. Hats up to you.
Thank you. It took a long time to write. It took a very long time to write. Yeah. Anybody else? I'm asking a question.
Ma'am, maybe I have a question.
Yeah.
Ma'am, how did she balance being a Christian and then being against British rule? Because she converted into a Christian right when Britishers were here.
Yeah,
so how did she do both?
This is the interesting thing. Why can't you? You can. You have. See, she was very influenced by a man called Neelkant Gore. Neelkant Gore was an early convert to Christianity. Okay, and he wrote a book about his conversion to Christianity. So there were influences there, which were, she argued against, say, for instance, she never wore anything but saris all her life. Okay, and even footwear, wearing shoes used to offend her. So the first thing she does when she comes back from her travels is to kick off the shoes and go into barefoot mode, because that is what she was familiar with. So there's a whole history of being socialized in a certain kind of way. You will not easily give that up. She remained a vegetarian all her life. She never even ate, she never ate according to the. So she didn't follow, she interpreted Christianity for herself. And she says somewhere, that in Christ there is no male or female. That's why he appealed to her, and she took. And she had a great need of personal religiosity, expression of religion, which she seems to have found in the figure of Jesus Christ. In my book, I've written that perhaps if she had lived at the time of Chokhamela or others, she may have actually gone into that form of resistant bhakti, which also broke with the Brahmanic Hinduism. But in her time, by the time she is there in the 1850s, 1870s, 1880s, that's not a living tradition any longer. It is, in fact, it's been incorporated into regular Hinduism. So it's not available to her in that form. And I think in some ways, deep personal faith, plus a community of people who, see, she was very impressed with the social work that the Christian missionaries did, even in England. So she sees them going and doing work with the poor and whatever. So she's moved by the active social, not reform so much as active social intervention. And so for a variety of reasons, she seems to have been, but she was not going to allow them to dictate to her. So her argumentative brain remains right through. She never gives up on that. You know, she can interpret things for herself, which is why she wrote this controversy with the governor made all her friends in England very agitated, but she never gave up. By the way, many years later I found, this is also strange, many years later I found a reference to the fact that the Chiplinkar brothers, you know, the Chiplinkar brothers were radical extremists, in fact, you know. They hid a gun in her institution. So she had all sorts of relationships with people. She was a true nationalist. You know, I mean, this business of the British are going to determine our fate is not something that she does. She goes to the national conference. She goes to the, she spoke at the Indian National Conference. And when she's speaking over there, she actually says, she gets up to speak and people shout her down because she's controversial by them. And Tagore mentions it. And later on she says, then she goes to the Congress conference and she's asked, she speaks and she's speaking softly. So they're shouting and saying, speak loudly, speak loudly. She says, you men have never let us speak, you know. So now you're telling us to speak loudly. Basically she's saying, you're very contradictory characters. पहले तो बोलने नहीं देते हो, फिर ऊपर से, you know, they are saying जोर से बोलो, kind of thing. So she's quite an interesting person. She continues to grow according to the political circumstances of her time, and that is what is interesting about her. She doesn't close the book completely and say, okay, now I'm a Christian, I'm going to follow what the church is telling me to do. No chance. That's not something that she's doing. She's too intelligent and too what is it called? You know, she's kind of too argumentative, and she will refuse to accept something unless she's convinced. So that's the hallmark of it. In that sense, she's a true it's also very, I think, when you're a woman and you are not allowed to speak, most of the time you're not allowed to speak, no? There is a way in which when women begin to speak, the fathers will say, chup ho jao, you know, you don't know anything. You have to speak against the authority of men. So she's not going to accept that, which is why she uses the conscience. She says, I will do what my conscience tells me. You don't tell me anything. And she actually says, I have not exited one set of priests in order to be under the authority of another set of priests. I've left Brahmanic Hinduism and the priests over there. I'm not going to accept your authority.
Thank you, ma'am. I think I got my question. I think Rama Devi has a question to ask.
Kuppatti garu unnaru. Kuppatti.
Ade iddaru hand raise chesaru sir, Rama Devi and Kuppatti garu.
Yeah.
Okay, anybody? Yeah, please.
Hello. Thank you, Uma ma'am, for that interesting and enlightening speech on Pandita Ramabai. As Venugopal sir has said, I too found it interesting that Ramabai was touring the US at the same time as Vivekananda, when he was giving those excellent and famous speeches on the greatness of Indian civilization, that she was speaking on the condition of Indian widows. So I would like to hear more on that if possible. And also I would like to know whether she got the same media coverage back in India and US or England as Vivekananda got. And also, I have actually one more question: whether the privileged elite class was on refusing, I mean, the religion, was it also refusing to acknowledge or get away from the culture, Indian culture also? I don't know if I'm clear.
Yeah. No, I think I'll begin with the last. I think there's an attempt to reinterpret culture. So, not according to what the colonial government is saying or the Christian church is saying, or even the Pune Brahmins are trying to say. There is an attempt to reinterpret culture from your own standpoint. And so, in a sense, you see in the institution that she organizes, that there is the widow's home. Ultimately, she took women from all castes. Okay, it began with Pune. It began with the Brahmin widows, because Brahmin widows were the ones who were there in largest numbers and abandoned by their families for they had no use for them, so they were gotten rid of. But over a period of time, others joined the institution too, and in the principles with which she ran the institution, I think there's something very creative over there, because they're all doing manual work, they're all learning weaving, they're all learning printing, they're learning gardening, so they're cooking, they're creating their own vegetables and whatever. So she tries to create a self-sustaining community. Now that is unique, whether it's in Christianity or amongst the Pune elite. The idea of a female space which is safe for women, and then it can sustain itself in some form, and it has got affective bond. I had done tried to do a talk based on Ramabai's photographs. Ramabai was extraordinary in the fact that she photographed everything. She's one of the first people to feel the power of the camera. And she took a lot of photographs. And in a sense, she disrupted, by the 19th century, especially in Bengal, you'll find that the only photographs that they were all making were these photographs of couples. You're familiar with the fact that everyone who gets married, and now there is a whole video or whatever. In the old days, there used to be one photograph that they'll go to the studio and they'll take that husband and wife photograph. Then they will display it in their house. In the front room, they will put husband and wife couple photograph over there as some kind of display of great conjugality that they have. Against that picture, that's the norm. She creates these wonderful photographs of women, and it's marvelous. It's absolutely amazing, the kind of photographs that she has created. Okay. Now, the original photographs are not available to us. Some are there in her institution, but some are there in the books. And I tried to put a talk together about how she, in a sense, disrupts this notion of the only role for women is to be married and to be in a conjugal space. That is something that you not find. Her widows do go off and get married. One of them, the first widow in her institution, was married to Karve, the famous Maharishi Karve. The founder of the SNDT university systems.
Yes.
So, but Karve also does not do what she does, because Karve makes a distinction between the married woman, the woman whom he marries, and the widow reformer woman. So his wife, which is Iravati Karve's mother-in-law, Iravati Karve, no? The writer of Yugantar. So Iravati Karve's mother-in-law is the wife of D.K. Karve, okay, the founder, Maharishi Karve. She also brought the sister-in-law, who was an adult widow, and he kept her for the reformer work. But the widow whom he remarried, was left at home to look after the home and so on. She didn't do any of the reformer work. So there's a very interesting division of labor that he creates in his own network. Ramabai disrupts everything. She's not sticking with any code. No, she's just she's experimenting and creating a set of tradition, ways of living. Now you imagine that you travel from Pune to Central India, and you bring back 300 women and children. It's extraordinary. It's extraordinary in her time. Later on, you asked that question about Vivekananda. One interesting facet of that is because he said no women are there. No widow is oppressed in India. She not only takes him on, she put on a disguise, and she went to Vrindavan and to Banaras and places like that, and she rescued widows who were being oppressed, who were being sexually abused over there. She dresses as otherwise she wore white. Okay, in fact. She created her own little traditions. She didn't cut her hair off. She didn't wear the widow's clothes, but she wore white. And she also sometimes looks like she's almost like dressed like a nun, But in India, of course, that's not what she does. So she's quite innovative. There she dressed as a working class woman, and she travels so that she won't be recognized. And she goes to Vrindavan and to Banaras and brings back widows from there who are being oppressed. So, and she says, which saint is coming to save these people's lives? That is, she's making a dig at Vivekananda. He's not coming to save these people's lives. He's just, holding forth and saying, no woman is oppressed no widow is oppressed in India. So it's a very interesting moment in history, and the American women are divided between Mr. Vivekananda and Ramabai. I want to, there's a little bit in he got himself clothed. He dressed as an Indian to go and address the Chicago Conference. He actually used velvet to create the image of you must have seen that photograph of him, with the turban that he has with both. He's dressed a little bit like a Maharaja. And he's describing it, that he needs to go and make an impact on this Western world, where he's going to hold forth on the greatness of Hindu civilization or Indian civilization. So there's no doubt that Vivekananda is a reformer, okay? But he's certainly not someone who ever acknowledged the oppressions of India, of the women.
I think Kopparthi garu unnara.
Kopparthi తర్వాత సంగిశెట్టి గారు ప్రశ్న అడిగారు చాట్ లో, వీలైతే మాట్లాడమని కూడా అడిగారు సంగిశెట్టి గారు. తర్వాత కొప్పర్తి తర్వాత.
Okay.
Ma'am, thank you very much for your wonderful exposition on Pandit Ramabai. In fact, I am speaking from my vague memory, because I have read your book way back in maybe about 20 years back. I remember reading in your rewriting history, the life and times of Pandit Ramabai. So you were telling about so many women who were contemporaries to Pandit Ramabai, who were opposing the Brahmanical patriarchy, who were fighting with the society, who were fighting with their husbands. And you were talking about, of course, a typical Hindu widowship on one side, and this, what we call opposing it, people like Pandit Ramabai were doing. I think there were so many accounts you are giving. So, in fact, your book, I remember it runs about some 6-7 chapters. You took up Pandit Ramabai only at the end chapter only. You took up, so the remaining 5-6 chapters, you are dealing with the contemporary woman. So that was really interesting. In fact, locating, you have given, I should say, so your title of the book was very much justified. The life and times, life and times. So times you have given extra extensively. So speaking about those women also would definitely help us. Say I do remember a few names. Susila Bai, Tara Bai Shinde.
Oh, Tara Bai Shinde, of course, very important.
Of course, you mentioned maybe. And some Karve, some Anandi Bai Karve.
Yeah, Anandi Bai Karve. Anandi Bai Karve is the Anandi Bai Karve is the wife of Mr.
Maybe. No. I'm just trying to say that. Say apart from Pandita Ramabai, there were so many other women were also there that is to be reckoned with.
No. So there is Ramabai. Ramabai is very
Ramabai. Yes.
Extremely important.
Yes. Maybe another lecture is necessary for those things to be reckoned with. That is one thing. So next one. So I don't exactly remember towards the end because I have read it some 20 years back, and it was only the book I read on Pandita Ramabai. Your own, your book only. Did Ramabai die Christian?
Yes.
Or was re-proselytized?
No. She died Christian. But
she died Christian.
She died a Christian, and she kept changing the sect. So at one point, she actually, she and the girls from her the institution, they go in for some kind of emotional ritual in which they all cry and weep, and it's a kind of different kind of let's say sect within Christianity. So she kind of experiments with different sects within Christianity, but she doesn't re-proselytize. She doesn't return to Hinduism in any form. She stays a Christian, but she redefines her notion of Christianity, and I think
something like that. Yeah. So what was that redefinition of Christianity?
It's a highly emotional space in which the rational thinking is, in a sense, being suspended. I actually explain it as the widows have been through so much misery in their lives that this emotional charge is like a bhakti moment in which you are actually allowing the emotions and the suppressed emotions to flow, and that is something that is described. Now, what else happened in her life? And she continued till the end. I did not mention this. She learns languages and she translates. She translated the Bible into Marathi. She translated the Hebrew Bible, the Bible from Hebrew into Marathi. So there's a way in which she engages productively also with the Christian literary corpus, as it were. So there's something quite unusual about that.
Thank you, ma'am. Thank you. Very nice.
Madam, Sangishetti.
Sangishetti Anna unnara? He sent a question through chat, ma'am. I would like to read his question.
Mike on చేశారు.
Sangishetti garu మాట్లాడండి.
Good afternoon, ma'am.
Good afternoon.
Thanks for the extensive lecture. We are delighted to see on the Zoom. I have one question, madam. That is, what was the reaction of the Balagangadhar Tilak towards the reforms of the Ramabai, and as well as what's the stand taken by the Pune press towards the reforms of the Saraswati Ramabai? Because the Kesari journal which was run by the Balaganga Tilak was quite against towards to the reforms. I wish to know these things, ma'am.
So the see, the press is there was one, we call it, there's a little bit of the moderate press, and then there is the right, what we will now call the right-wing extremist press. Tilak represents, Kesari represents that part, and then there is the what was it? The newspapers run by the Prarthana Samaj people, you know, like Bhandarkar and all of those people. They also had a press which was a little bit more moderate. Now, when she became a Christian, everybody jumped on her and said, as I said, they basically castigated her, they mocked at her. They said, today she's become a Christian, tomorrow she'll become a Muslim, you know, things like that in the press. And it's at that point that only Phule defends her. And Phule defends her publicly in his article in Satsar, saying, it's also a newspaper magazine, saying that what else will an oppressed woman do except convert to Christianity. I mean, he actually poses that as a possibility, as a rational choice that someone is making. Now, what is interesting is that history, that controversy, which is very powerful at the time when the Puna Brahmins all break with her, including the moderate Brahmins, they all break with her over this question of, I will not shut the door while I am praying. And if the girls ask to become Christian, I will not ask them to become Christian. But if they want to become Christian, I will not stop them. So the controversy is over this question of promoting Christianity. So at the end, the Puna Brahmins all break with her. So the moderate Brahmins, the Bhandarkar, Rana Day, all of them broke with her. Then she is left with no constituency, no group of people around her in Pune or in Maharashtra. Over the years, she develops links. You can see that she develops these links later on. And particularly, see, when she took on the governor over the plague controversy, at that stage, Tilak defends her. And at that stage, it's Gokhale, I think, who's there. See, Gokhale is going to go to England to argue on behalf of the Pune elites on the matter of the plague, the drastic measures taken over plague. But in the end, he's left completely alone. There's no one to defend him. So what is interesting? What is interesting is that there is a recovery of some kind of constituency because she took the British government directly on over the plague measures. And that is why I said later on, Chiplunkar actually is obviously in touch with her. And so maybe she went in for some kind of radical nationalist position, but we don't know. It is a suppressed part of history. We don't know about it. I was shown this piece of reference by a friend in Baroda who pointed out the textual reference to it. So it's possible that she had some links with ultra-nationalists at some point of time, at the time when she was in a controversy with the colonial government. But she never, I think the difficulty in her life has been that how can she stay independent of the influences of other people? She was someone who made choices for herself, argued and made rational choices for herself, quote unquote rational choices for herself. Okay, so is that all right, Sanghi Shetty? Srinivas?
Thank you, ma'am. Thank you. It's all right, ma'am.
Uma?
Yeah?
I think on this plague issue, she wrote a letter to the editor.
Yeah.
And some sister Geraldine compared that letter as a seditious letter.
Yeah. Of course.
And connected that to Chapnekar's assassination of two British officers.
Yes.
So she is also in a way seditious.
Yes. At the end of the day, an independent, free-thinking, liberty-seeking woman.
Yeah.
What
She
else
was
will you
seditious.
do? She will be seditious. No? So that's it. Governments always target free thinkers and independent person. That is why they need to control you all the time. You have to be strung by them and given the line. You have to feed them with the position. If you are an independent thinker, you are a dangerous person.
నేను మాట్లాడతా. హలో, ఐఎమ్ కాచేయని. థ్యాంక్ యూ వెరీ మచ్ ఉమా చక్రవర్తి గారు. ఐ వాంట్ టు నో హౌ Ramabai defined as an activist, as an intellectual and activist, the Brahminical patriarchy of that time.
See, as an you have to separate the two. In the if you read her high caste Hindu woman, okay, that's her critique of Brahminical patriarchy very clearly, and it's a beautiful, it's a very powerful account. As I said, you know, it's and it's a very fair account. It is not completely condemnatory. For instance, she said many parents love their children, you know, and it's not that they want to oppress the child widow, but circumstances and the community and the society expects you to treat the daughter, the widowed daughter, in a certain kind of way. So she's very fair in her assessment, but she's seeing that as part of Brahmanical, patriarchal conditions which are forced upon people. And so in that book, you will see the critique of patriarchy very clearly. Okay? In that particularly in that book, you see, there are other pieces of writing in which she will also mention some of these things. But this is the most powerful one. She never gives up on the right to think and interpret for herself. So to that extent, she is actually using her intellectual training and her capacity to think in rational free choice kind of ways, which is why she chooses to do certain kinds of things, and then she'll defend it. She'll argue it and she'll defend it also. So that's like when she critiques the Christian church, she just chucks them, you know, I mean, she lambastes them for the fact that they are trying to force people to conform in a certain kind of way. And as I said, she gives this brilliant argument. She said, I have not left one set of priests to join the oppression of another set of priests. So I've left the Brahmanical order, but I'm not going to now accept your Christian clergy as dictating to me about how I should understand my religious faith. Okay. So to that extent, I think she not only critiques Brahmanical patriarchy for the rules, you have to, you do, this is what you do. You know, that is, the rules are laid down and you have to conform to them. And she throws that aside. That's not the way to be. Similarly, she throws aside the authority of the Christian church. So in that way, she's actually very, very powerful. She's not a free thinker. She's refuses to have the authority of someone else to decide for her. I have a mind of my own, she writes in one of her letters. So I will do what my conscience tells me. To that extent, it's a very powerful thing in the 19th century for a woman to turn around and say that, coming out of the Brahmanical patriarchy. So it's a very powerful thing. I will understand and I will interpret. And then I will do what is required. So it's very, very powerful way of saying, this is who I am and this is how I will be. You don't tell me. You don't tell me how to be. So to that extent, by that time, she's very, quote unquote, we may even call it as, she has no male person in her life. Her father has died, her brother has died, her husband has died. Everyone is dead. There's no man. I am my own person. And I will decide for myself. What is right and what is wrong?
Thank you. One more question.
Hmm.
What is the contribution of Ramabai to the feminist theory of the Indian feminist
See,
theory?
I would call her a proto-feminist. See, we don't have a language for understanding patriarchy. I am one of the people who defines patriarchy later on, in a structured way. Ramabai is all 19th century women, the radical women, Ramabai and Tarabai Shinde, they define patriarchy as a double standard of morality. They understand patriarchy as double. One set of rules for the men, one set of rules for the women. That's how they understand it. They don't understand it as the women, court, women in family are structured. There's a critique of Brahmanism, okay? And there's a critique of male's double standard of morality. But beyond that, how you put community, family, and together to describe the structure which oppresses women in a certain kind of way, that last step is not yet worked out. Okay? That's what that is the work that we did. The word patriarchy doesn't exist. See, in the 19th century, the word patriarchy doesn't exist. Patriarchy, the word patriarchy is a social anthropological concept. Rule of the father is called patriarchy. Okay, there is no. It's the feminists of the 80s that, you know, redefined the term patriarchy to mean what it is. And it required a lot of work at that stage to clarify it and not get it all mixed up with, and make it some wishy-washy thing. You have to make it a rigorous structure. And in India, the bigger challenge was not only to see patriarchy, but to see patriarchy in the context of caste.
Yes.
That is the biggest challenge.
Yes.
They didn't have that challenge. We had that challenge. You know, so that's our that's the challenge that we are faced with.
Okay. Thank you.
Madam, unmute చేస్తా మేడం.
అన్మ్యూట్ చేసుకోక అన్మ్యూట్.
తర్వాత జ్వలిత మేడం ఒకటి చాట్ లో అడిగారు ప్రశ్న.
అదే జ్వలిత మేడం అడిగిన క్వశ్చన్ కూడా ఆల్మోస్ట్ కాత్యా మేడం అడిగిన క్వశ్చనే. ఐ థింక్ ఇట్ షుడ్ బి ఫైన్.
According Pandit Ramabai, what is feminism?
Feminism అన్నది ఆల్మోస్ట్ షీ ఆన్సర్డ్ నౌ. రజితక్క మళ్ళీ అన్మ్యూట్.
No? Yeah. Okay.
Fine. Yeah. Okay.
I would ask to give some extension information about Pandit Ramabai. Hi, Umaji.
Hi. Hello.
In context to reformative activities, what was her contribution to support particularly widows of her time? Is Mukti Sadan is exclusively established to support widow women of that time?
It started off with definitely with widow women, widows who were cast away by their families. So it is people who are being oppressed in their own families, not fed, not clothed, sometimes thrown on the streets, and they will end up at the gates of Mukti Sadan, which is how they started off. Which is why she uses the photograph very effectively for them also. She actually brings back, she enters those women into the institution, the Mukti Sadan. She feeds them, clothes them, looks after them, and whatever it is. Then later on, we'll see photographs of them looking completely different, because they have been just given a happy place to live in. That's all, at the end of the day. There's a beautiful photograph of 4 or 5 young widows seated in, looking just happy, at the end of it. Also very innovative woman. There's one beautiful photograph of Ramabai leading a discussion. A lot of the women in the Southern are seated over there, and one older widow is speaking to these young widows and describing her own life and her condition. So she used techniques. By the way, she was a great educationist. She was an early user of the Montessori system. She was quite an educationist. She produced material also for education. So there's a way in which she not only gave them a happy place to be in, but she also made it possible for them to understand each other. So she has a very beautiful example. She says when the little babies come into the hospital, she was taking abandoned babies also into the Mukti Sadhan. And she said, in order to make the children feel comfortable, she would take one of the slightly older girls, children, boys and girls, and give one child that one person, so that person you relate like a sister or a brother, within. And she does this consciously in an attempt to make the emotional bond between them possible. So she's very creative in her educational techniques also, and in her strategies, and I think great humanitarian impulse which she's able to reflect. I find that the most moving thing. That is, how many of us turn our own personal histories into a public cause? Her parents died in a famine, so famine is something that you must intervene in. Famine causes terrible distress. And that photograph, she's got a photograph, there are more, long line of people standing there with their plates to collect their khana. And even to take that photograph would have been a challenge, because, you had that wide, you used to have a box, a camera, and the photographer will come, cover his head, and, but to get that huge sweep, they may have had to take two photographs and piece them together. But she has a photograph like that in her book on these people who have been relieved from famine. So she actually turns personal experience into social intervention. And that is very powerful.
Okay, thank you so much. But can we get some essays or some chapters about reformative activities separately?
Well, maybe we can try and find out if there's specifically, it's there in some form, but I see the points that you're making. I'll look around and see if there's anything specifically which has been written like that. Okay.
Thank you much. Thank you so much.
Sumaira Naz.
అన్మ్యూట్ చేసుకొని మాట్లాడండి సుమేరా.
మేడం అన్మ్యూట్ చేసుకోండి. ఓకే.
హలో
మాట్లాడండి.
Can we see you?
Okay.
Even briefly. Hello.
Yeah, I just had the Zoom link, and I'm not from academic background, but thanks, Uma Madam. The conversation was really interesting. I had to drive somewhere, but still I got into the car, plugged in to my car, and I started listening to the conversation. And it was really inspiring listening to her story. So one thing that that grabbed my interest was when you're saying that these women, right, like men of those times, wanted a education, wanted empowered women where they would want to discuss their issues, their thoughts, their intellectual thoughts to those women, their wives especially. And I see parallels now as well. In terms of men want a financially independent women.
Yeah.
They can earn something and bring in some livelihood for the family. So I was just thinking, what is the contribution? Like, for example, in these days, brothers would want their sisters to have a job, and family would want their daughters to be educated before they get married, right? And husbands would want their wives to earn so that they support, they also extend their hand by into finances of the family. So what was the contribution? You said Mr. Srinivas, like her brother was also there with her when she was facing troubles, and her husband. What was their contribution in her growth?
See, with the brother, we don't know. The brother is a joint history. So we never get a sense that he said something to her, or but the father is very important. The father is constantly evoked as a person who helped her to, and I will then use this other. See, it's not to become a financially independent person. I will disagree with you on the fact that all the men around us, they tell us that they want us to be educated. Do they want us to be empowered?
Okay.
What is empowerment? Empowerment is someone where I can think for myself and act for myself, and argue with you also, and refuse. I mean, I have to be convinced about doing something, So in a sense, there is an instrumental way in which men want you to be, and that was the problem with those 90s. I mean, Mr. Ranade is regarded as a great man. Okay. But what is he doing? He's controlling what she's reading.
Okay.
He decides what she should read. Then he's schooling her to be the perfect wife. Okay. So there's a value in being the perfect wife. But if you become an independent thinker and you become argumentative, straight away the danda will come on you.
Okay.
And they'll tell you, no, you can't do this. In North India, I know this expression very well. I don't know about in Andhra country. Immediately they'll say, "Phir tune meri baat kaati." The father will say, "Tune meri baat kaati." That is, if I argue with my father, it's a case of I'm cutting his argument. They can't stand that. They can't stand that. They actually want you to repeat what they are saying. I'm saying empowerment is actually something that is the third eye, is Mr. Jyotiba Phule's third eye. I can think for myself. I can analyze for myself. I understand right and wrong. I understand why society works in a certain kind of way. I understand how patriarchy also works. So if I say to you, don't go out because there's danger to you, I should be able to. We have this lovely point in a play that used to be performed. There's a girl who stays on in the library in her college till later in the evening, and so she's not back at the same time. Her brother is pacing at the gate. When she comes in, he says, "Don't you realize how much danger there is on the street? Why do you do whatever that?" She just looks at him and she says, "Why don't you men sit inside the house? You're the one fellow who's causing all the trouble. You stay at home." So that, it's the capacity to turn around and argue back and say, "I have got a mind. I will use it. I will use it. Right. You don't tell me what is right, and you don't use your authority to tell me what is right." So that's the. So I would actually say we are looking at empowerment in very narrow ways. We're saying, "Acha, teach them." Of course, everyone should go to college. Everyone should be able to work. I'll give you an example from my father. My father, I never thought that my father was radical. Okay. But my father was very affected, and he was born in 1898. He saw his sisters widowed and cast away and abandoned in the 1930s, right?
Okay.
Now, it stayed in his head. And they were always being sent from one house to another, go live there, and they'll feed you. And nobody has any respect for you, and everyone will extract labor from you and treat you as some nuisance that has landed upon you. My father was clearly very moved by this distress of his widowed sister and his widowed mother. You know how it was translated when I had a job as a school teacher, and I resigned it in order to join my husband to go and do field work. He was doing field work in a village, and I resigned that job and I went to live with my partner in a village, thinking that, you know, it's okay, I can do this. My father was very upset. He said, "You resigned a permanent job." He was very upset, and the whole thing was, you may marry or not marry. You must never put your hands out like this in front of a man and ask him for your sustenance. Now, this is how I see the real agency for a woman. As long as I'm dependent on my husband, and it's very happy. You bring a second income. Yes, very nice. I will control how that is to be spent.
Okay.
Or my mother will control how it is to be spent. No, I mean, at the end of the day, so you can be the cash cow, but what does it do to your own agency at the end of the day? So I think we are also looking at empowerment and so on in somewhat limited ways. Women must be autonomous individuals.
Okay.
Then they are really empowered.
I see your point. Right. Thank you.
ఖాదర్ గారు ఉన్నారా? ఖాదర్ గారు ఉన్నారా?
లేరు అనుకుంటున్నాను.
చూడు ఒకసారి చూసి ఉంటే ఆయన మాట్లాడు.
మేడం
లేరా? ఓకే ఓకే. ఇంకెవరైనా ఉన్నారా?
ఉమా గారు, just one more. Actually, you mentioned about Ramabai as ethnographer. Is there any kind of article that explores about her ethnographic work as such?
Yeah, well, we'll have to put it together. As I was telling you, I wanted to do this lecture based on the photographs. Then you would see the way in which she uses current resources that are available to her in a certain kind of way. So I've seen her as a visual ethnographer because she's actually taking photographs which are very powerful. Like, you know, we don't have any photographs of working women. The only photograph that we have is one taken by because Ramabai asked for that photograph to be taken, where women are threshing, they're throwing that, you know, we know the basket, you stand on a height.
Right.
That's the only photograph that we have of a working woman for that time. So in that sense, I think she's very interesting because she's capturing on camera the multiple ways in which women are in her institution are staying and whatever. So in that sense, I think it's a very it's visual ethnography. But she also, because she writes and she draws from experience when she writes, she's a little. See, when I gave that example of when she says the Rajasthan.
Yeah.
This is she's stored it in her brain, and she's produced it 20 years later when she's writing about the census. So in that sense.
And also one more thing, in the 1860s, you mentioned about the famine, and she was in Andhra area.
Yeah.
I
think it's 1867 or something. There is a big famine. That's when her father and her mother died.
Right.
So, which is
in Andhra, it was 1872.
It's 1872 then. It's 1872. Yeah. It would be 1872 because she's already older at that stage. She's not.
She was 14. She was 14 at that time.
And Srinivas would have been 16 or 17 or something like that.
Yeah, maybe.
Little older. And they continued. And you look at the journey of these people. They continue. Because then they move from Andhra, or they're going all the way to Rajasthan and then ending up in Calcutta. You know? So when she ends up in Calcutta, I think she is probably 18 or so. Some years have passed.
Okay.
So that is itself a very, very interesting account of the manner in which some families which were part of the learning tradition,
Right.
you know, so it's very interesting.
ఇంకెవరైనా ఉన్నారా?
Any more questions? మేడం క్లోజ్ చేద్దామా?
క్యాస్ట్ మీద కొంచెం క్లారిఫికేషన్ అడిగారు మేడం. ఉమా చక్రవర్తి గారు, హౌ షీ డిఫైన్డ్ ది caste and how she looks the caste problem, please.
See, we have only one reference to the caste question.
Okay.
Which is interesting. There is one clearly Dalit girl who is also has converted to Christianity, and the church is not sending her for education outside. Whereas they are sympathetic to Ramabai's travel to whatever they may be to some extent supporting that or whatever. And she argues against that, and she says, so she can clearly see that the church was very keen on showing Brahmin converts because they went up in the stock. They also had lots of non-Brahmin converts, but they didn't have the same symbolic value as they were dismissed as rice Christians. Whereas when you're an intellectual and then you join Christianity, then you promote that and say, see, even they have come in our fold. So they obviously had, so Ramabai is being supported because they also think that she's useful to them. But this girl who wants to study and who is from Dalit caste, she's not being promoted. And Ramabai says, argues against that and says, I don't know what happened to whether she succeeded in ensuring that girl was also promoted, but she said, even the Lord, Jesus, was a carpenter. So he was like from the working class. You should not practice elitism within the church, So in that sense, I think that's the one reference that we have of her standing against. And then later on, she did have people from various communities in her institution.
But not before she takes Christianity. Anywhere she talk about the caste is there?
Yeah, you see, when she wrote High Caste Hindu Woman, she's calling it high caste. So she's aware of the fact that this form of oppression is amongst the high castes.
Okay.
So there is an understanding that caste itself impacts gender.
Okay.
Which I think is very interesting. To acknowledge that caste is shaped by, gender is shaped by caste, is a significant understanding of the caste system. She may not stand up and say caste is bad. I don't know. I may not got those references, except that we know that people from all communities joined her institution thereafter. So she wasn't obviously practicing caste in that sense of the term, but more openly to stand against the caste system. I'm not aware of other aspects of that. But when she writes this book and when she makes this reference to the fact that you are being biased against this child because she's this girl, because she's from a low caste, she's standing up for the inequalities. She's standing against inequalities.
Thank you.
I think somebody Galaxy A52. Would you like to ask a question?
Hello?
ఎవరు గెలాక్సీ
అన్మ్యూట్ చేసుకోండి.
అన్మ్యూట్ చేసుకోండి.
Hello? Yes. Can you hear my voice? Can you hear my voice? We can hear your voice. We would like to see. We would also like to see your face.
Uma Chakravarti, Madam, I'm very happy to know about that. I should be thankful to your speech to know about that women social reformer of that period. Very, very happy to know about that. Again, but I might not be able to understand properly, of course, but I have some doubt that it is, I think, to avoid that Brahminism widow culture only, she wanted to get herself converted into Christianity. I feel that. Okay, that is well and good. And at the same time, when she established Muktidham also, and different, with the background of different religions and different castes, I think they were all gathered into that Muktidham. Is there any, her conversion is confined to her individual only, or otherwise, and all the Muktidham women who were brought to that Muktidham are enforced to convert into Christianity? Is there any such type of conversion?
In the early stages, there is no influence. There's no concern for the practice of her religion is distinct from the practices of the other children. For instance, as I was telling you, Anandibai Karve is the first student that she gets in her institution, and Anandibai Karve then marries
a doctor.
Yeah, Maharshi Karve, and moves on. So there was no but there was no ban on conversion also. So if some of the girls wanted to convert, she did not say you cannot do so. So that is the one it's that issue that caused the controversy. She said, I will not use my authority. I will not say no, you can't do it. Okay. But I will not say you must do it. So,
because I doubted that Muktidham institution was being, I think, was being funded by some missionaries. Otherwise, you could not manage. I think it is. That's why. Is there any compulsion of conversion on that part?
No. Initially, she was not funded by the missionaries. She was funded by American, some amount of American money, which was not church money. Later on, and then there was this support from the Pune Brahmins, the Ranades and Bhandarkars and all the rest of it. After the controversy, then it became, then she had to search for funds. Then she moved from one place to another, and she got funds from Australia, from different kinds of places, and she also created that self-supporting institution in the sense of the food, and part of she tries to organize it as a kind of ashram in which they can do with minimal funding. So this challenge of how you do reform and how do you get your money, from whom do you get your money? It's a little bit like the feminists today, as I see it, who are often forced to go to NGOs, get funding from NGOs.
Yeah.
So it's a little like that.
Of course, it is not my opinion because regarding that financial position, but at the same time, in different religion and different caste people were gathered into that, were brought to that Muktidham. I hope that they might have enjoyed the freedom of having their own religion or their caste. Then only it becomes a Vimukti Sadan.
No. It was.
There should not be any compulsion on them.
Of course, absolutely. There should be no compulsion, and there was no compulsion. There was no compulsion, which is why I said some people stayed there and went on. I mean, there were people came and chose their brides from there, and so at least Karve did that. Karve marries her first student.
Okay, madam. Thank you very much, madam. Thank you. Okay, over to
Manas.
మేడం క్లోజ్ చేద్దామా?
One more last thing.
ఎవరికైనా క్వశ్చన్ ఉందా?
అడగండి.
Again, Umaji, one more last question. Actually, Ambedkar says that women are the gateways of caste. I mean, this kind of, is there any influence he mentions anything about Ramabai or any study?
I have not come across a reference like that. I don't think so. See, that requires a level of conceptualization, which is actually, which you can see even among all the thinkers. Even Pune does not do that kind of conceptualization. But Ambedkar does, because Ambedkar, you must remember, Ambedkar is, he's trained in modern rational thinking, and he's a sociologist. He actually is writing this, Women Are the Gateways is coming at the end of a period when he wrote his master's thesis, his first thesis in Columbia University on the caste system. So he trained in sociology, he's able to see the caste system the way feminists today can see the caste system. He's able to do that because he's got a scientific way of understanding the relationship between caste and gender. So when he places endogamy at the heart of the oppressive practices, he's captured the spirit of Brahmanical patriarchy. You may not call it Brahmanical patriarchy, but he's captured the spirit of Brahmanical patriarchy, because when you can see that marriage is reproduced. See how different it is from, there is Madam Annie Besant that I mentioned. See, she's seeing it as a way of retaining purity of caste. And she's seeing it as good. Ambedkar is seeing this as the way in which the caste system is perpetuated.
Right.
You know? Yeah. So, and endogamy, genetic pool you maintain over there. I often say this jokingly, but it should be taken seriously. I said the greatest genetic engineer in the country was Mr. Manu. Because he decided that everyone should marry within the caste. He said you must marry within the caste. Varna Sankara is the worst thing. In the textual history of Sanskrit texts and whatever, misogyny, Varna Sankara is the worst thing. And Kali Yuga, what is Kali Yuga? Kali Yuga is defined as when women do not observe the rules, and when the low caste don't observe the rules. It is so clear. It is so clear. The relationship between caste and gender and Brahmanical patriarchy and Brahmanical caste system itself being perpetuated. Because if you don't marry endogamously, the caste system will disappear at some point, no? And instead now we have the most rationalist thinking characters who turn around and say they'll go wherever they are in the world, and then they'll seek their bride only from their own community. They'll put ads about themselves. I'm such and such an engineer, this, that, and the other. And then the only people whom he'll entertain, that man will entertain, are people who are from the same caste. So it's a very evil system. It's a very, very evil system.
Thank you. Thank you.
Yeah, I think we can close the talk. ఇంకెవరైనా ఉన్నారా క్వశ్చన్స్ వేసేవాళ్ళు, అడగాలనుకున్న వాళ్ళు? ఎవరు లేరంటే క్లోజ్ చేద్దాము.
నెక్స్ట్ వీక్ అనౌన్స్ చేసాం.
ఓకే.
తర్వాత మేడం ని 1 month కి లెస్ అది ఈ వ్యాసం ఇవ్వమన్నాడు.
ఏది మేడం?
మేడం ని ఈ వ్యాసం
అదే పర్సనల్ గా అడుగుతాను.
ఇప్పుడు కూడా చెప్పు ఒకసారి చెప్పి.
So thank you so much, Uma ma'am, for your time. I think I could thank you for your Sunday, not just your time. Thanks for your Sunday spending with us. And throughout I felt so connected because I translated Sharan Kumar Limbale, and I'm bringing Baluta into Telugu from English. And my paternal grandmom is from Maharashtra. She's a monk. So many things to to get connected to the talk and to you and to the topic. So I think this is a special day from what we are doing from Praraway. And Sri Lakshmi and ma'am, I think I could get your paper within a month or so. That will be really helpful. So Sri Lakshmi garu end చేసేద్దాము. ఉన్నారా?
శ్రీలక్ష్మి మేడం అన్మ్యూట్ చేసుకోండి. శ్రీలక్ష్మి మేడం అన్మ్యూట్ చేసుకోండి.
ఈ సమావేశానికి అధ్యక్షత వహించిన మానసకు, ప్రధాన వక్త అయిన ప్రొఫెసర్ ఉమా చక్రవర్తి గారికి, చర్చ ప్రారంభకులైన నెల్లుట్లు వేణుగోపాల్ గారికి, ఈ సమావేశాన్ని వీక్షించిన సాహిత్యకారులందరికీ కూడా పేరు పేరున ధన్యవాదాలు తెలుపుతున్నాను.
మేడం ఆపేసేనా?
వచ్చే వారం మళ్ళీ ఇదే సమయానికి ఆదివారం 11 గంటలకి మళ్ళీ ఉంటుంది ఉపన్యాసం. సరే, క్లారా జెట్కిన్ మీద ఉమా మేడం మాట్లాడతారు. ఉమా చక్రవర్తి.
No, I want to know what I'm supposed to produce after a month. She's telling me that I must give a paper.
The lecture that you spoke just now, ma'am.
Oh my God.
We are planning to publish.
Came so late to you.
We are planning to publish all these papers.
Take a little bit more time, huh? Not
Okay,
one month.
Definitely, ma'am. You have that. Thank you, ma'am. So, andarki namaskaram. Thank you.
వచ్చే వారం క్లారా జెట్కిన్ మీద లెక్చర్ ఉంటుంది 11 గంటలకి ఆదివారం. అందరం మళ్ళీ ఇక్కడే కలుద్దాం. థ్యాంక్ యూ.
Who will give the lecture on Clara Zetkin?
నల్లూరి రుక్మిణి.
Acha. Okay. Okay. Thanks everybody.
Bye.
All right.
Thank you.